The cold comes first, not the gentle kind that kisses your skin, but the kind that bites hard, sharp, and unrelenting. It creeps through torn coats and frozen boots, settles in the lungs, and turns every breath into a quiet ache. Across the white horizon, the wind drags long ghosts of snow through broken trees and bodies half buried in drifts. Somewhere beyond the haze, artillery murmurs like distant thunder, just enough to remind every surviving soul that this isn't winter. It's war wearing winter's skin. Then comes the movement, slow shapes in padded uniforms, rifles held tight to numb fingers, faces wrapped in frost. German soldiers, Soviet soldiers, boys who should have been home, now swallowed by a landscape that feels alive in its cruelty. The snow muffles everything except the crunch of boots and the soft, steady drip of ice melting from helmets. Every step feels like trespassing into a place the earth itself no longer wants to remember. The Eastern Front doesn't. Raw here it waits, silent, patient, hungry, and finally, the truth settles in like falling ash. This was not a battlefield. It was a cold nightmare stretched across thousands of miles, where frostbite killed faster than bullets, where entire armies were swallowed by blizzards, and where sanity cracked under the weight of endless white. This is the story of that frozen madness of the front, where winter ruled, men broke, and the world learned what cold warfare truly meant. So tonight, let the lights fall low, let the room grow still, and let the past breathe slowly through the snow. And before we begin, tell me where you're listening from, and make sure you're subscribed. These old ghosts walk quieter when someone is here to remember them. The cold moves first, not the sharp, merciless kind that freezes skin on contact, but a quiet, cold, thin, unsettling, almost polite. It seeps into the grass along the frontier and settles in the hollows of old wooden farmhouses. It drifts through birch trees and hangs low over abandoned fields, as if the land itself senses something enormous approaching. Before any shot is fired, the eastern plains fall strangely still, wrapped in a silence too heavy for summer. Soldiers stationed along the border notice it in their bones long before they see anything in the sky. They say the wind has gone cautious, the birds have taken flight, and the mornings come slower each day. It is a cold that breathes like a warning. In the villages scattered across the frontier, life continues at a hesitant pace. Carts creak along dusty roads, dogs bark at shadows, and farmers glance east more often than they admit. Rumours bloom in the smoke of evening fires, rumours of trains moving at night, of columns stretching beyond the horizon, of German scouts seen in the tree line. But rumours are easy to dismiss when the air is warm and chores demand attention. It is only when children wake at dawn and whisper that the grass feels colder than it should that the adults begin to worry. They brush frost from fence posts that shouldn't exist in early summer. They tighten their coats, though the sun is rising. They look at the sky and feel it watching them back. And still the cold spreads, creeping under tent canvases and onto metal rifle bolts, carrying with it a low hum no one can quite place. Soviet soldiers stationed near Brest and Białystok lean over their field radios at night, hearing static that crackles like breath on glass. Some swear they hear engines distant, layered, countless. Others insist it's imagination, nothing more than nerves stirred by strange weather. Yet sleep refuses to come easily. The nights feel too long. The darkness feels too aware. A sense of waiting settles over the front, thick as dew. Then comes the stillness. It rolls across the steppe like a blanket, muffling sound, muting footsteps, and tightening the air. Horses paw nervously at the ground. Guards lean on their rifles, exhaling clouds in temperatures that should not be forming clouds at all. The commanders write it off as a passing chill, but the younger soldiers glance at one another with unspoken dread. They've lived long enough on this land to know when something is wrong. And this cold, this strange, creeping, breath-holding cold, is not something they've felt before. Across the border, the German camps feel it too. Troops preparing for an invasion that hasn't yet been announced wake to frost on their boots and a silence that unsettles even hardened veterans. The air seems to be holding its breath, waiting for an order that everyone knows is coming but no one wants to say aloud. Tanks sit in long rows under the dawn light, their engines ticking softly, like beasts dreaming in their sleep. The men sharpen their bayonets and tighten their helmets, but they speak in quiet voices, as if not to disturb the fragile stillness surrounding them. When the sun finally rises, pale and hesitant, it reveals a world caught between seasons. Summer wheat sways in a breeze that feels like winter. Dew sparkles like ice. Somewhere far along the line, a lone artilleryman rubs his hands together and whispers that the earth feels tense, the way it does before a storm. But no one looks up. No one speaks. Everyone feels it, the cold that arrives before history changes direction. It is the last quiet the Eastern Front will ever know. The trains begin before dawn. Long, groaning shapes of steel sliding across Europe, their wheels screeching against cold rails as if protesting the journey ahead. Inside the darkened cars, soldiers sway with each motion, half asleep, half afraid, surrounded by the heavy smell of oil, leather, and unspoken expectations. They press their faces to the glass as the countryside glides past. Quiet farms, still rivers, shuttered towns. None of these places know the storm approaching, though the animals seem to sense it. Cows lift their heads. Horses freeze mid-step. Birds rise in frantic spirals, as if fleeing something invisible. On the platforms, officers shout, orders drowned by steam and metal. The fog from the engines spreads like a ghostly tide, wrapping boots and ankles and crates of ammunition in a white shroud. More trains follow, endless ones carrying fuel, horses, shells, bread, radios, medical kits, engineers, and the vast machinery of a war too large for anyone to fully understand. They move east in a lumbering, rhythmic progression, the rails humming beneath them like a warning drum. Drivers wipe sweat from their foreheads, even in the cold morning air. Conductors look away from the horizon. The whole operation feels too big, too deliberate, too heavy to stop now. For the men aboard these trains, the future is both a rumor and a promise. The officers say it will be fast, that the Soviet Union will collapse in weeks, that they will be home by autumn, medals on their chests, stories waiting to be exaggerated over beer. They believe it because belief is easier than admitting the unknown. Some write letters to wives and sweethearts, holding the paper steady against rattling metal while describing a confidence they do not feel. Others simply sleep, dreaming of green fields and warm kitchens, far from the steel, fuel, and tension of the journey. Yet there are moments fleeting, quiet ones when the mood shifts, when the train dives into a wooded stretch, and all outside becomes shadow. Some soldiers swear they feel something watching, not enemy eyes, but the land itself. The east stretches ahead like a vast, unreadable story, and every mile deeper feels like a page they cannot turn back. The forests grow thicker, darker, the rivers widen, the skies flatten into a pale sheet that presses downward as if trying to smother sound. Even the wind changes, becoming sharper, cutting against the edges of the moving cars. As the trains slow near the border, the silence deepens. Troops disembark into half-light, stamping their feet against the cold ground as officers review maps in hushed tones. The border villages lie unnaturally still, windows closed, animals penned, chimneys dark. The only sound comes from the slow clinking of weapons as men assemble, adjusting straps and tightening belts. Trucks line the roads in long columns, headlights covered, engines idling like restrained beasts. Tanks lurk beneath camouflage nets, dew glistening on their armor. Then the orders come. Quiet, deliberate, heavy as stone. Soldiers move into position, each step echoing across the still earth. A sense of enormity hangs over them, a recognition that they are standing at the edge of something vast and irreversible. Some men swallow hard, others mutter prayers. A few stare east with wide, unblinking eyes, as though trying to see what waits beyond the tree line. For all the confidence their superiors display, There is one truth the men feel in their bones. The world is holding its breath. The land ahead looks endless, ancient, untouched, and merciless. And as engines cough awake, as columns tighten, as the sky lightens into a pale, indifferent grey, the soldiers sense that whatever waits on the other side will change them forever. The road to Barbarossa is not just a march. It is a crossing into cold, into distance, into a war no one is prepared to survive. The morning begins with a strange, metallic quiet. A thin mist drapes itself over the borderlands, softening the shape of every fence post, every birch trunk, every lonely farmhouse crouched beside the road. Soviet sentries rub their eyes and stamp their boots, watching their own breath drift upward like pale smoke. A few of them sense it, the tension in the soil, the weight in the air, the hush that feels too deliberate. But dawn is coming, and dawn has always been gentle here. Then the world opens, not with a roar at first, but with a single, trembling thump far down the line, like someone dropping a giant stone into the earth. Birds explode from the trees. Horses jerk their heads toward the sound. The sentries stand straighter, squinting toward the horizon. Another thump follows, then another. A low vibration runs through the ground, crawling up through boots and bones. The mist itself seems to quiver. And then the artillery begins. The sky erupts into fire lines of orange, streaks slicing through the early light, falling like vengeful stars upon bunkers, trenches, outposts, and sleepy barracks. The mist ignites into flashes of white as shockwaves tear through it, shredding the quiet into dust. The border breaks open in a storm of pressure and light. The ground shakes, the air tears. 1,000 mornings seem to scream at once. Soviet guards stagger backward, clutching rifles that feel far too light for the weight of what's coming. Some shout orders drowned in the thunder. Others run for telephones that shake violently on their hooks. A few drop to the ground as splinters of earth and metal rain down around them. The first shells strike behind them, throwing soil into the sky like dark fountains. One bunker vanishes in a ripple of fire. Another cracks open like an egg, smoke pouring from its wounds. Even the trees seem to flinch. Across the border, German tanks surge forward through the smoke, tracks grinding, engines rumbling like a slow-moving first avalanche. Their silhouettes rise out of the fading mist, dark, blocky shapes with barrels trained forward, cutting paths through the flattened grass. Behind them come waves of infantry, stepping in rhythm with the earth's trembling. The morning light glints off their helmets, turning entire battalions into lines of steel marching into the storm they created. And above it all, the sky fills with wings. German bombers glide overhead, their engines droning in cold harmony. Shadows sweep across fields and rivers as aircraft dive, dropping explosives that whistle before tearing the world open. Barns collapse, roads erupt, villages vanish beneath clouds of dirt and flame. A radio tower tilts, shudders, and falls like a wounded giant. Soviet officers spill out of command huts, uniforms half-buttoned, shouting into radios that only spit back static. Maps scatter across tabletops as blasts shake the earth, knocking pencils to the floor. The border guards who survive the first minutes find themselves running without direction, without clarity, some eastward, some toward comrades they can't reach, some toward trenches already buried in rubble. It happens so fast, too fast. One moment, the dawn was just another dawn. The next, the horizon has become a wall of fire. Men try to gather themselves, to regroup, to understand the scale of what is hitting them. But understanding is a luxury the Eastern Front has no intention of offering. The artillery does not stop. The tanks do not slow. The planes do not rise away. Everything presses forward, relentless, synchronized. A storm guided by calculation and shock. And in its wake, the border, the line meant to mark the edge of a nation, no longer exists. It has been shattered, burned, erased by the first hour of a war that will swallow continents. This is how it begins. Not with a decision, but with a morning that forgets how to be morning. The columns begin to move before the smoke has even lifted from the border. Engines cough awake, one after another. Trucks, tanks, motorcycles, forming a mechanical heartbeat that pulses through the morning haze. The sky is still bruised with the color of explosions, but already the German advance stretches eastward in an unbroken line. Steel glints beneath the rising sun, wheels thudding against dirt roads that have not known this kind of weight in generations. The first men to march carried dust on their boots and a numbness in their faces. The border assault was loud, sharp, and swift, but the terrain ahead is vast and silent. Panzers grind forward, carving deep wounds into the earth, leaving churned fields and crushed grass in their wake. Behind them come the trucks, endless trucks loaded with infantry, who sway with every jolt as the convoy pushes deeper into territory no one fully understands. Some soldiers keep their rifles across their knees, fingers grazing cold metal. Others rest their heads against the wooden slats of the truck walls, eyes drifting over the passing landscape. Birch forests, wide fields, distant farmhouses leaning like tired old men. There is a strange beauty to it all, but the men do not trust it. The land feels too quiet, too open, too capable of swallowing them whole. Civilians scatter at the sound of engines. Some flee into the woods with sacks strapped to their backs, stumbling through underbrush as the columns approach. Others stand frozen by their doors, blankets around their shoulders, staring at the soldiers with a mixture of fear and disbelief. A few make desperate signs with their hands, pleas for mercy, for direction, for understanding, but the columns do not slow. There is no room for conversations here. The war is moving too quickly. Dust rises behind the convoys in thick, choking clouds. It clings to uniforms, lashes eyes, and settles in throats until every breath tastes of soil and exhaust. Officers ride ahead on motorcycles, goggles smeared with mud as they shout orders to the wind. Horses pulling artillery lurch nervously, hooves slipping on rutted roads as they follow the metal beasts ahead of them. The distant thud of artillery still echoes from the west, a fading reminder of the morning's violence. As the sun climbs higher, the heat becomes oppressive. Metal grows hot beneath the touch. Helmets trap sweat. Flies gather around every moving shape, men, machines, and the bodies left behind on the fields they pass. Yet the columns do not break stride. The advance is a living thing now, feeding on momentum, fueled by the belief that the enemy is already collapsing. But even inside the trucks, where men sit shoulder to shoulder, no one truly knows what lies ahead. Maps show cities, rivers, rail lines. Officers speak of timetables and expected victories. But the soldiers see something different. An endless road stretching into haze, bordered by forests that seem to watch them pass. The farther east they go, the more unreal it feels, as though they are moving not just across land, but deeper into a world untouched by reason. Still, the columns push on. At midday, they cross abandoned trenches, discarded rifles, and burned-out vehicles, a shattered patchwork of Soviet defences caught unprepared. The men look out the truck windows, at overturned helmets and scattered documents, at fields trampled by retreating boots. Some feel a surge of confidence, others taste dread. For though the enemy has fallen back, the land itself feels heavier with every mile. By late afternoon, the convoys stretch so far that the head and tail cannot see each other. Officers consult their watches, drivers grip their wheels, infantry adjust their packs. The deeper they move, the more the silence of the east closes around them, a silence vast enough to drown the sound of engines, the thoughts in their heads, the certainty in their hearts. Night will come, the cold will return, and the columns will keep moving forward, deeper, into a place that feels less like conquered territory and more like a waiting mouth. The unknown is not ahead, it is all around them now. The forests rise slowly along the edge of the advance, like dark walls waiting to close in. At first, the soldiers barely notice them, just clusters of fir and birch scattered beside the roads, their leaves trembling from the rumble of tanks. But mile after mile, the trees begin to thicken, stretching deeper and denser, their shadows pooling across the ground like spilled ink. Soon the columns are no longer passing by the forests, they are entering them. The canopy swallows the light. Engines grow louder in the confined space. ricocheting off trunks as the trucks push forward through narrow, winding paths. Branches scrape at helmets and canvas covers. Leaves drift down in slow, dusty spirals, shaken loose by the trembling of the earth. The air changes, becoming cool and damp, carrying the scent of moss, soil, and something else, something older, something watching. German soldiers lean forward on the benches of their trucks, eyes searching between the long rows of trees. The darkness between the trunks looks bottomless. Shadows seem to shift even when nothing moves. Some men mutter that these forests are ancient, untouched, wild in a way that European woods no longer are. They feel like places where stories happen, bad ones, whispered by firelight, the kind that end with disappearances. The officers dismiss such thoughts, but even they can't shake the unease. The maps show these forests, yes, but not like this. Not with this weight, not with this depth. The roads inside them are narrow and poorly kept, flanked by ravines and bogs that swallow wheels whole. When the first German motorcycle skids off the path and vanishes into a ditch filled with black water, the men understand. This land is not simply terrain, it is resistance. Here, sound behaves strangely. A snapped twig echoes like a gunshot, while the roar of engines fades unnaturally quickly between the trees. Communication becomes difficult. Units lose sight of each other after a single turn. At dusk, the trunks blend together until direction becomes a fragile, slippery thing. Soldiers begin marking trees with chalk just to keep from circling back onto their own tracks. And the Soviets, those who survived the border's initial explosions, melt into the forest with frightening ease. It starts with small things. A lone rifle shot from somewhere unseen. A burst of machine gun fire from behind a boulder that retreats into silence. Mines appear beneath leaves that weren't disturbed an hour before. A truck strikes one and erupts in a blossom of fire between the trees, the blast muffled by moss and soil. When the smoke clears, the sound dies just as quickly, swallowed by the green shadows. Occasionally, the soldiers glimpse figures small, quick, phantom-like. Soviet scouts slip between trunks like ghosts, wearing dark coats and boots muffled with cloth. They strike with precision and vanish before the Germans can respond. For every one the Germans catch, 3 more emerge, further down the line. The forest breathes around them. At night, the unease grows sharper. The darkness is absolute, unbroken, except for the thin glow of lanterns flickering against trees that seem to lean inward. Men hear rustling in the undergrowth, cracking branches far too close for comfort. Some swear they hear whispers, not words, but hushed breaths, echoing on both sides of the road. The forest feels alive, hungry even. The deeper the Germans push, the more the forest resists. Vehicles bog down, horses panic, radio signals fade. A regiment becomes separated and vanishes for hours before stumbling out onto a clearing with wide, frightened eyes. They speak of trails that led nowhere, of distant gunfire that seemed to come from everywhere, of trees that hid entire platoons until they were nearly on top of them. By the time the Germans emerge from the first great forest belt, the advance has slowed. Nerves are frayed, confidence has thinned. Though they have plenty of fuel and ammunition, they lack something harder to replace, the sense of certainty that carried them across the border. In the open fields ahead, the sky feels wider, the light brighter, but no one forgets the sensation of those trees closing in behind them. They linger in memory, silent, watchful, swallowing whole divisions without a sound. The forest is still there, and the war is only beginning to learn what the land itself can do. They were supposed to be gone by now, broken by the border assault, scattered by the shock, erased by the sheer weight of the advance. That was what the planners had promised. That was what the soldiers had been told. But as the German columns pushed deeper into Soviet soil, they began to see movement in the smoke. At first, it was only shapes, shadows slipping through the ruins of villages, figures crouched behind the shattered husks of tractors, silhouettes darting between scorched haystacks. But the shapes kept returning, and slowly, unmistakably, they took the form of something the invaders were never meant to face so soon. The Red Army was still here, everywhere. It began with scattered rifle cracks, single shots echoing across abandoned fields. Then came the bursts of machine gun fire, short controlled volleys from positions no scout had reported. German soldiers dove to the ground, unsure where the bullets came from. When they fired back, their shots tore only through grass and smoke. The enemy melted into the earth. Reports filtered up the line. Soviet troops still active. Resistance heavier than expected. They regroup faster than we can advance. The forests had hidden some of them. The swamps had sheltered others. Entire battalions had simply vanished into the mud and mist, only to reappear miles behind the German spearheads. They were not organized, not yet, but they were relentless. And every hour their numbers seemed to grow. In ruined villages, soldiers found signs of hurried evacuation, a half-eaten bowl of porridge, a kettle still warm on a stove, footprints leading into the trees. But they also found things abandoned, not in fear, but in readiness. Stacks of cartridges hidden under floorboards, rifles wrapped in cloth beneath pig troughs, bread sealed in jars buried beneath sheds. The Soviets had not fled. They had momentarily stepped aside. Even the wounded refused to fall still. German medics tending to their own, injured, heard rumors from locals, men with torn uniforms dragging themselves toward the tree line, bleeding but determined. A lieutenant swore he saw 2 soldiers carry a third on their backs through a burning field, the flames reflecting in their eyes like mirrors of iron. They moved with a grim, stubborn purpose, driven not by officers' orders, but by something deeper, something older. The land itself seemed to protect them. Every ridge offered concealment. Every ditch became a trench. Every barn became a fortress. At night, the German soldiers sat around dim lanterns and spoke in low voices about the enemy that refused to dissolve. They described Soviet soldiers firing from the shadows, slipping through smoke, charging through burning wheat with bayonets that glinted red in the firelight. They whispered of counterattacks that erupted without warning, small, fierce strikes that left the fields littered with spent shells and silence. It was not the ferocity that unsettled them. It was the persistence. They expected retreat. What they found was resilience. One afternoon, a column approached a village expecting surrender. Instead, an elderly woman stood in the road, broom in hand, blocking their path. She did not speak. She did not move. When they finally nudged her aside with their vehicle, she pointed toward the hillside, where a group of Soviet soldiers were already advancing, rifles raised, eyes burning with defiance. These were not the scattered remnants of a collapsing army. These were the early embers of something rising. The Germans pushed forward, but each victory felt fragile, temporary. Every captured position came at a cost, measured in bodies and time the planners had not allotted. The landscape was too vast, the people too rooted, the defenders too unwilling to let their homeland be swallowed in a single blow. And slowly, quietly, the soldiers at the front began to sense a truth that crept colder than the approaching winter. The Soviet Union was not collapsing. It was absorbing the blow. The Red Army had bent under the assault, but it had not broken. Not here, not now, not ever. The heat arrives suddenly, as if the sun has stepped closer to the earth. One morning, the soldiers wake to a sky the color of faded brass, and an air so heavy it feels like a curtain being drawn over the land. The cool winds of early June vanish, replaced by a suffocating stillness that settles into the lungs and makes every breath feel like work. Dust rises with every footstep, swirling in dull spirals before clinging to skin and uniforms. The heat wave has begun. The earth cracks under it, roads shimmer, metal bakes. German trucks, already strained from the brutal pace of the advance, begin to cough and sputter under the weight of boiling temperatures. Radiators overheat. Engines choke. Mechanics strip to their undershirts, wiping sweat with oil-blackened hands as they work beneath the flaming glare. But there are too many vehicles, too few spare parts, and the heat is merciless. It warps, melts, dries, and consumes. The infantry suffer most. Helmets trap the heat, cooking scalps beneath hard steel. Boots grow stiff with dust and sweat, rubbing raw blisters into heels. Soldiers march with tongues thick in their mouths, swallowing air that tastes like soil and desperation. They ration water carefully, too carefully, sipping from canteens already warm enough to sting. The rivers they cross are shallow and sluggish, reflecting the sky like molten metal. And then there are the bodies. The dead left behind in ditches and fields, German and Soviet alike, begin to change in the heat. Flies swarm thickly over them. Carrion birds gather on fence posts, patient and methodical. The smell hangs in the air like a heavy veil, drifting into the columns and settling over the men until they taste it in the back of their throats. The heatwave turns every battlefield into an oven. But the living fight, too. The Soviet soldiers, hardened by summers spent in fields and forests, endure the heat with a grim familiarity. They move lightly through the scorched grass, slipping between patches of shadow with a fluidity that unnerves the invaders. They fight in short, fierce bursts, ambushes launched from dusty ravines, machine gun nests disguised by dry brush, anti-tank trenches dug overnight into sun-baked soil. The heat becomes part of the war. A weapon, a burden, a test. German soldiers quickly learn there is no shelter from it. Forests offer little shade. Their air is just as stagnant beneath the branches. Villages provide brief respite, but the walls radiate warmth like furnaces. Even at night, the temperature refuses to drop, leaving men awake on their bedrolls, staring at the fluttering shadows cast by lantern flames as sweat beads on their foreheads. Water becomes more precious than ammunition. Columns divert toward wells, only to find them dry or poisoned or guarded by Soviet snipers who vanish the moment they shoot. In one village, German soldiers dig desperately with shovels and bayonets, attempting to open a spring where locals insist water once ran. They find nothing but dust. The land seems to drink every drop before they can. Animals collapse in the fields. Horses pant until their legs give way. Dogs lie in the shade of barns, tongues hanging, eyes dull. Flies crawl across their fur. The air vibrates with their buzzing, and still the advance continues. Sweat-soaked maps wrinkle in officers' hands as they try to keep the pace promised to Berlin. Every hour lost to heat is a failure recorded in distant rooms far removed from this suffocating reality. So the men march, and the trucks groan, and the tanks roll forward, their metal skins scorching to the touch. Yet even in the haze of exhaustion, some soldiers begin to notice something unsettling. The farther east they go, the less the Soviets seem to fear the heat. They fight with the same relentless energy as before, as if the sun itself favors them. A few Germans whisper that the land is choosing sides, that the heatwave is not an accident but an omen, a sign that this war will not be won by speed or surprise. Because beneath the burning sun of 1941, the truth becomes harder to ignore with every blistered mile. The East is vast, the East is merciless, and the East is nowhere near finished testing them. They appear on the horizon like bruises, dark shapes rising out of the heat haze, their chimneys bent and their rooftops sagging beneath the weight of war. Smolensk, Mogilev, Kiev, names spoken quietly in headquarters tents, marked with red circles on maps that already smell of sweat and dust. To the planners far behind the lines, these cities are stepping stones. To the soldiers approaching them, they feel like something else entirely. Living fortresses, wounded but unbroken, waiting with their jaws clenched. As the columns draw near, the first thing they notice is the silence. Not the blank silence of empty countryside, but a taut, uneasy stillness, the kind that gathers just before a storm. Smoke rises from chimneys that no longer burn fuel, from buildings shell-torn and smouldering, from barricades hastily built of furniture, bricks, sandbags, and whatever else desperate hands could find. Soviet civilians move like shadows through the streets, eyes narrowed, shoulders tight, pushing carts piled with blankets and children, and pots rattling with each jolt. But the soldiers inside the cities do not move like shadows. They move like anchors. These garrisons cut off, surrounded, outnumbered, refuse to retreat. Their commanders stand atop half-ruined steps and shout orders hoarse with dust. Their soldiers fire from broken windows, from collapsed roofs, from basements converted into bunkers. Every building becomes a fortress. Every alley, a trench. Every shattered apartment, a firing position held together by splintered beams and the stubbornness of men who know they will not survive the week. The German troops advancing toward these cities have grown used to movement, endless movement, forward momentum that feels almost like inevitability. But when they reach the outskirts, the pace dies. Tanks slow, trucks stop. The infantry crouch behind rubble and peer through scopes at silhouettes perched in shattered clock towers. The enemy shoots from places that shouldn't be defensible. One building falls and another begins firing. Streets that appear empty erupt with machine gun bursts that echo between the walls like trapped thunder. It is as though the very stones have chosen to resist. Inside the cities, the air is thick. Dust floats like ash, coating lips and teeth. The wounded groan in courtyards where the grass has burned to nothing. Nurses carry buckets of water one ladleful at a time, dodging falling plaster as shells crash into nearby blocks. Children sit against cellar walls with their knees tucked to their chests, listening to the rumble of tanks rolling overhead. And through it all, the defenders fight with a quiet, exhausted fury, as if each minute they hold buys time for a land much larger than the one under their feet. The German soldiers feel the resistance in their bones. They scale stairwells that smell of smoke and fear. Bayonets forward, breath shallow. Rooms are cleared one by one, but the enemy seems to multiply in the dust. Snipers lurk behind leaning bookshelves, firing and fading deeper inside. Mortar crews launch shells from courtyards hidden beneath curtains of laundry strung between windows. Every corner hides teeth. Even when the cities begin to crumble, they do not bend. Even when buildings collapse into heaps of stone and timber, they keep fighting. Even when they are surrounded, starved, bleeding, they refuse to fall quickly. For days, for weeks, sometimes for months, these pockets of resistance hold out against armies designed to break nations. Smolensk's walls burn red for days. Mogilev's defenders fight until their ammunition is gone and their knives are dull. Kiev, encircled and gasping, endures long past the moment when surrender would have been easier. The cities fight alone, but they do not die alone. Their defiance travels on the wind eastward, across the forests, through the ravines, over the wide rivers. Soldiers fleeing the collapse carry the stories with them, of commanders who stayed at their posts until the roof fell in, of battalions that fought until nothing was left but smoke and silhouettes. The tales spread from village to village, from regiment to regiment. They become sparks that drift into the great furnace of resistance forming far behind the front. And the German soldiers, walking through the ruins after the last shot fades, feel a new heaviness settle on their shoulders. The silence that returns is not relief but warning. For each city that fought alone left behind something more than rubble. A promise that the war they thought would be swift has only begun to show its true shape. It begins so quietly that no one notices at first. A cool draft brushing against the back of a soldier's neck. A shiver passing through a horse despite the afternoon sun. A breath that lingers just a little longer in the air before fading. The heat wave still scorches the plains, baking the roads and cracking the soil. But beneath the furnace-like days, a different kind of cold stirs thin, probing, curious. Nature rarely announces its intentions. It whispers them. German troops trudging through dusty fields feel the first chill one morning and dismiss it as nothing relief, perhaps from months of blistering heat. But as they march, boots grinding loose gravel into powder, they notice the wind has changed direction. It carries with it a strange edge, sharp and metallic, as though blowing from a place untouched by the sun. A faint scent of frozen water, of pine sap stiffening, of something waiting just beyond sight. The men rub their arms without meaning to. At night, the campfires burn hotter, brighter, as though competing with the rising cold. Soldiers draw closer to the flames, holding their hands out until their palms redden. Sparks drift upward into an ink-black sky that feels broader than it did a month ago. The stars look harder, two cold pinpricks staring back with distant indifference. The men pull their blankets tighter around their shoulders. They do not talk about it, but they feel it. Winter is watching. The officers feel it as well, though they try to ignore it. Maps still show ambitious arrows stretching rapidly toward Moscow, toward the Volga, toward the distant promise of victory before the snow falls. But the air does not care for maps. It carries its own warning. The locals feel it most. Old women with scarves tied around their heads emerge from huts and look toward the sky, lips pressed thin. Farmers wipe frost from the rims of their wells, even though the day is warm. Children wake in the night, complaining that their windows sound different, as if something cold is brushing against the glass. The animals sense it. Horses grown thin from heat begin stamping nervously, snorting clouds that shouldn't exist in September. Dogs pace at the edge of villages, ears flat, staring into the forest as though expecting something to emerge between the trees. Even birds behave strangely, migrating early, gathering on telephone wires in thick, restless clusters before taking flight all at once. And then, one evening, the first frost appears. At sundown, the ground is dusty and warm. By dawn, a fragile layer of white coats the grass and tank tracks. Soldiers kneel beside it, touching it with disbelief. It melts instantly beneath their fingers, leaving only dampness. A few laugh it off. Others stare at the horizon, where the trees stand motionless, their branches stiffened as though bracing for something vast. The frost returns the next morning, and the morning after that. Soon the nights are colder than they should be. Breath fogs against lantern light. Water in canteens freezes along the edges. Machine gun barrels left outside develop thin skins of ice. The cold creeps slowly at first, softening boots, stiffening canvas, slipping under coats like an unwelcome visitor. It does not bite yet. It merely reminds. But the warning is clear. Some soldiers whisper that the land is changing sides, preparing to fight for the people who know it best. The people who have survived winters fierce enough to break entire armies. Others speak of Russian folk tales, of the General Frost who awakens each year to drive out invaders. Most men say nothing. They simply stand in the half-light and watch their breath rise in pale streams, wishing they could shake the chill that clings to them even as the sun rises. For months, the Germans have advanced under the illusion that time belongs to them. But now time has shifted, tilted, turned. Winter is coming early. Winter is coming fast. Winter is coming with purpose. And though the first hints are gentle, almost shy, the soldiers at the front know deep in their bones that this is no ordinary season approaching. This is the beginning of the Eastern Front's true commander, the one that none of them can outrun. It arrives with rain slow at first, timid, barely more than a trembling on the leaves. The soldiers welcome it, lifting their faces toward the grey sky, grateful for the cool drops after the long heat wave. The dust settles, the wind softens, the horizon blurs behind a curtain of gentle drizzle. For one quiet hour, the land feels almost merciful. But mercy is not what the East has in mind. The drizzle thickens, the sky darkens. The rain begins to fall with a steady, relentless rhythm, thousands of needles stitching into the earth. The first puddles appear in the shallow tire tracks left by passing trucks. They widen, deepen, connect. The ground softens beneath them with a strange, sucking sound, like the breath of something waking up under the soil. The Rasputitsa has arrived. At first, the soldiers don't understand. They have known mud before on farms, in forests, on training grounds. But this mud is different. It has a will. It swallows boot prints whole as soon as they're made. It sucks at wheels and hooves with a greedy, slurping pull. The roads dissolve. The fields become oceans of brown water. The earth changes from ground into something alive, something hungry. The trucks are the first to falter. Their engines roar as drivers push forward, but the wheels spin uselessly in the thickening mire. Mud clings to the tires in enormous clots, weighing them down until the rubber disappears beneath the growing sludge. A single misjudged turn becomes a death sentence. One truck sinks to its axle, then another. Soon entire convoys grind to a halt, trapped in a swamp where roads used to be. Men leap down to push, boots disappearing to the knees with a shocking cold that bites straight through wool. They grunt, curse, strain, but the mud does not give. It pulls harder, sucks deeper. The trucks groan like wounded creatures as they sink inch by inch. Even horses panic, their legs trembling as the mud clutches them, dragging them downward with every frantic kick. The forest edges seep forward too. Water drips from the branches in a steady, taunting rhythm. The air smells of rot and soil, thick enough to taste. The rain does not pause. The sky has opened its throat, spilling endless water onto the land. And beneath that water, the earth churns into a viscous, suffocating trap. Columns splinter, supply lines fracture. Units meant to arrive within hours trail in days behind schedule. Soldiers scrape mud from their uniforms only for more to splash onto them seconds later. Helmets grow heavy with rain, rifles clog with grit. Blankets become sodden weights. Every step forward feels like sinking. The Soviets move through it differently. Not easily, but knowingly. They appear at the edges of the Maya scouts, in rain-darkened coats, slipping between trees without leaving clear tracks. They fire from positions that seem impossible to reach, then vanish. A squad of Germans charges forward, only to find themselves waist-deep in mud before they can return fire. Bullets hiss overhead, lost in the downpour. The battlefield becomes a quagmire, where movement itself becomes a risk. Some nights, the rain softens, and hope stirs. Fires are lit beneath makeshift shelters. Wet boots are removed and wrung out by trembling hands. Men drink from tin cups that steam in the cold, but the quiet never lasts. Dawn always brings more rain, more mud, more sinking. One morning, a soldier wakes to find that a truck parked beside him has disappeared entirely, buried overnight by the slow, patient pull of the earth. Only the tip of its antenna remains above the surface, like a marker for a grave no one dug. The officers try to maintain order, but nature is indifferent to rank. Maps smear into useless blotches. Compasses fill with moisture. Watches stop ticking. Every sense of direction becomes an illusion. The land stretches out in all directions, wet, brown, sucking, endless. The Rasputitsa does not roar like artillery. It does not burn like fire. It breaks armies by exhaustion, one step at a time, one wheel turn at a time, one sinking heartbeat at a time. And as the German soldiers fight to free their boots from the mire, their trucks from the sludge, their horses from the pull, a chilling truth spreads through the ranks like fever. The land itself is fighting them now. And the land does not lose. The roads they followed into the east have turned to graves not yet filled, but waiting. Night falls like a curtain soaked in ink. One moment the world is a dim, grey blur of rain and sinking roads. The next, it dissolves into a darkness so complete it feels almost physical, thick, pressing, swallowing sound and movement alike. The columns destined for Vyazma move into that darkness, with lanterns hooded, headlights blackened, and orders whispered through clenched teeth. Light, even the smallest spark, feels dangerous here. The men march quietly, boots squelching through mud that no longer surprises them. Their uniforms cling to their skin like cold, wet bark. Every step is a struggle forward, upward, sideways, whatever the swamp demands in order to let them pass. The Rasputitsa has slowed everything to a crawl. By day, the men are trapped in place, but at night, under the cloak of darkness, they try to steal back some of the time the land has taken from them. But night brings its own predators. The forest looms over the road, tall and black, its branches arching inward, like ribs closing around a fragile body. The trees shift in the wind with creaks that sound too much like footsteps. Shadows drift between the trunks, moving in ways no wind should move. The officers say it's nothing, an owl, a fox, a nervous imagination. But the soldiers know better. They hear things, soft things, quick things, human things. Somewhere in the distance, a flare arcs upward and dies in the air before touching ground. Soviets signaling to each other. A few soldiers pause, instinctively reaching for rifles, but the officers push them on. No stopping, no lingering. Vyazma must be reached before dawn if the encirclement is to be avoided. The road is barely a road at all, just a twisting scar of mud between the trees. Horses stagger, Wagons list sideways. Trucks, stripped of everything unnecessary to lighten their weight, still sink unpredictably and must be hauled free with ropes that snap under strain. Men dig with their bare hands, mud caking beneath their fingernails. The night air is cold enough to sting, yet sweat pours down their faces. Then comes the fog. It slides in quietly, curling around ankles first, then rising until the soldiers can barely see 3 steps ahead. Their breath mixes with it, forming ghostly threads that drift upward and vanish. The fog muffles sound, turning the world into a whisper. Voices disappear into it. Commands fade instantly. The marching line bends, breaks, reforms in clumsy shapes. Someone slips into a ditch and is pulled out by strangers who cannot see his face. The Soviet scouts move through the fog like it belongs to them. A shot rings out sharp, precise. A soldier drops without a sound. Another shot. Another cry. The Germans fire back blindly, muzzle flashes stabbing holes in the dark. The forest echoes with gunfire, branches shivering beneath the rapid crack of rifles. But the attackers are ghosts appearing, firing, disappearing again into the swirling fog. Panic ripples through the column. Some men crouch, others run, others simply freeze, unsure of what direction safety lies. The officers attempt to restore order, shouting commands that die in the wet, heavy air. Forward, hold the line, stay together. But the fog swallows their voices. Men stumble into the forest, hoping to flank the attackers, only to lose the road entirely. Hours later, some return mud-caked, shaking, their eyes wide with the realization that only luck guided them back. The march continues in fractured pieces, like a body trying to pull itself forward while missing vital parts. The night deepens, the fog thickens. A horse collapses from exhaustion, and the men cut it loose from its harness without ceremony, stepping around it as it lies trembling in the mud. They do not have the strength to mourn. They barely have the strength to breathe. Somewhere ahead, beyond the fog and the forests and the sucking earth, Vyazma waits its streets cold, its defenders alert, its fate already, shifting in the shadows of the Soviet counterblow. But the men marching toward it know none of this. All they know is the weight of their packs, the ache in their legs, the sting of cold air ripping at their lungs, and the feeling growing stronger with every faltering step that the East is swallowing them, slowly, patiently, deliberately. By the time the first grey hints of dawn seep into the sky, the column is thinner. Men are missing, wagons are lost, horses are gone, but those who remain lift their heads and stare at the faint light with a quiet, exhausted relief. Night has passed, but the nightmare has not, and ahead lies Vyazma, where the darkness will return in ways they can't yet imagine. It comes in silence, not as a storm, not as a warning, not as a flurry carried by wind, but as a single white flake drifting down through the dawn light. A speck of winter settling onto the sleeve of a soldier who, for a moment, does not understand what he is looking at. He rubs it between 2 fingers and feels it vanish. He blinks, glances upward, and sees nothing but a grey sky suspended above the endless mud of the Rasputitsa. But then another flake falls, and another still. Within minutes, the air fills with a soft white curtain. The men stare at it with disbelief. Snow? Now? They expect cold, yes. Frost, maybe. But this quiet, dense snowfall drifting over a world still drowning in mud feels unnatural. It feels like the sky has decided to close the book on autumn early and turn the page to something far harsher. The snow lands gently at first, settling on helmets, shoulders, and the sagging canvas of stalled trucks. But gentleness is a lie. The flakes multiply, thickening into a white blur that reduces visibility to mere meters. The world softens, muffled under a sheet of falling white. Shapes fade. Trees become pale ghosts. The road disappears entirely. The mud reacts first. The top layer stiffens, skinning over with a cold crust that crunches beneath hesitant boots. For a few hopeful moments, the soldiers believe the snow might save them, that it might freeze the mire and allow the columns to move again. They cling to that hope, breathing clouds into the cold air, But the land has other intentions. The mud beneath the thin, frozen shell remains wet, heavy, alive. When a soldier steps too confidently, the crust breaks, and his boot plunges deep, deeper than before, into a sucking pool colder than any water. He gasps. Others rush to pull him free. The snow continues falling, hiding the danger with a deceptively pure veil. Vehicles fare worse. A truck lurches forward, tires spinning on the half-frozen surface. The crust gives way. The wheels break through with a wet crack. The truck sinks, nose first, into a pit disguised by fresh snow. The men shout, scrambling to unload ammunition and rations before the mud swallows everything. Their breath becomes frantic puffs of white. The snow does not stop. It thickens. By midday, it blankets the landscape in uneven layers, hiding trenches, ditches, and bodies alike. The men trudge through it with rising panic. Their coats are soaked, heavy, their fingers stiff, their faces stung by icy flakes driven sideways by a growing wind. The world around them shrinks into a dim, colourless tunnel of white and grey. Some soldiers begin to hallucinate shapes, moving in the snow figures walking just ahead, voices whispering through the wind. They follow them, calling out to comrades who are not there. Officers drag them back, cursing, shaking their shoulders, slapping their cheeks to bring them back to reality. But reality is shifting. The Eastern Front is becoming unrecognizable. Frozen mud clings to weapons, jamming bolts, snow clogs belts of machine gun ammunition. Rifle slings stiffen like wire. The wounded shiver violently, their breaths growing shallow. Medics struggle to keep morphine from freezing. Water canteens turn solid within an hour. Even the horses begin to fail. Their legs tremble as they wade through uneven drifts. Snow cakes to their fetlocks. Some collapse where they stand, steaming breath fading into the cold air. The men cut away their harnesses and press forward, leaving the animals behind because the war does not allow time to mourn in winter. And above it all, the sky darkens again. The snowfall intensifies into a white wall so thick it blinds, so quiet it terrifies. No thunder, no roar, no scream, just the soft, relentless descent of winter sealing the world in its frozen grip. The Soviets, now familiar with the signs of the changing season, move with grim assurance. They attack in bursts, knowing the Germans struggle to see even a dock few meters ahead. Their rifles fire from white shrouds. Their footsteps leave almost no trace. They vanish into the snowfall like spirits called home by the cold. The men of the advancing army finally understand the truth that this land does not want them here, that this winter is not merely weather but a force with intention, with memory, with teeth. The snow arrived without mercy, and it will not leave with any. The cold deepens without pause, settling into the machinery long before the men realize what is happening. At first, it's subtle rifle bolts that resist the hand, machine gun barrels that feel strangely heavy, trigger guards too cold to touch with bare fingers. Soldiers chalk it up to exhaustion or wet gloves or nerves stretched thin. They slap their weapons against their palms, breathe warm air onto icy metal, tap bolts with the heel of their hand. But the temperature keeps falling, and the guns begin to fail. One morning, before dawn, a sentry tries to test fire his rifle. He pulls the bolt back, and it stops halfway, stiff as stone. He tries again, harder. The frozen grease has turned to glue. It won't move. The trigger refuses to budge. He stares at the rifle in disbelief, the breath from his mouth turning to frost on the weapon's surface. A tool that once felt like an extension of his body now feels like a dead limb. Around him, other soldiers discover the same. Guns that jam. Guns that freeze. Guns that crack when forced. Even the simplest mechanisms betray them. Water from melting snow seeps into crevices by day, only to freeze into jagged shards by night, tightening around metal parts until they cannot move. The soldiers attempt every trick they know, warming rifle bolts under coats, rubbing them with cloth, striking them against trees. But the cold is deeper than anything they trained for. Machine guns fare worse. Gunners gather around their MG-34S, trying to coax life back into the stiffened beasts. The belts of ammunition rattle like icicles. The oiled barrels seize. The recoil springs stiffen until they vibrate with every touch. A gunner pulls the trigger. Nothing. He pulls again. Still nothing. Only a dull click echoes through the frozen air, a sound more terrifying than gunfire. The artillery crews suffer in silence. When an order comes to fire, the men rush to their cannons, only to find elevation gears frozen in place, breach, blocks locked shut by sheets of invisible ice, sights fogged and cracked. They work with gloved hands that cannot grip, shouting, cursing, beating their palms against metal that bites back. The cannons stare silently into the snowy distance, useless, immovable. The wind blows harder. It whistles through the empty barrels as if mocking them low, hollow tones like distant mourning. Snowdrifts pile against the wheels. The guns sink into the frozen earth, as though the land itself is pulling them down. In the distance, the sporadic crack of Soviet rifles echoes unfrozen, unfazed, adapted for this brutal season. The Germans learn, painfully, that the Soviet weapons do not freeze as easily. The Mosin Nagant rifles, built with looser tolerances and simpler mechanisms, shrug off the cold. The DP machine guns still cough fire through the storm. Even the T-34 tanks, with their wider tracks and rugged engines, grind forward through the snow where German vehicles stall. The imbalance grows. The land has chosen sides. Inside their coats, soldiers shiver uncontrollably. Their fingers turn white and numb. Their breath freezes inside their scarf, turning fabric into brittle sheets that crack when bent. Men wrap their rifles in blankets at night, sleeping with them pressed to their bodies like lifelines. In the morning, the blankets are rimmed with frost, and the rifles are colder than ever. When attacks come, they are chaos. A Soviet unit charges from the tree line. German soldiers scramble to raise their guns, only to feel the frozen bolts refuse them. They pull harder, harder still, until the metal cuts their palms. Some manage to fire a single shot before the rifle jams permanently. Others drop their weapons and reach for pistols, which misfire with hollow thuds. The Soviets keep coming. Their white coats blend with the snow. Their rifles flash like sparks in the storm. Some Germans die with their rifles still locked in their hands, bayonets unfixed, bolts unmoved. Others flee through the drifts, stumbling, gasping, the frozen guns weighing them down like iron chains. By nightfall, the battlefield is littered with silent steel. Rifles lie half-buried in snow. Machine guns lean at broken angles. Cannons sit in white fields like monuments to a war that refuses to obey human hands. The cold has taken the weapons. Tomorrow, it will take more. The men stare at their useless guns and understand a truth that chills them deeper than winter ever could. Out here, firepower does not belong to nations. It belongs to the cold. The last colours drain from the landscape as if winter is wiping the world clean. The fields that once burned gold under the summer sun are now drowned beneath blankets of white. The forests stand stiff and skeletal, their branches coated in frost that crackles when the wind breathes through them. The sky hangs low, heavy and pale, like a lid sealed over the earth. Every road leading toward Moscow stretches ahead as a thin, icy thread, fragile, narrowing, and more dangerous with every passing hour. The soldiers feel it immediately. The cold no longer bites. It consumes. Their coats stiffen. Their boots freeze. Ice forms along the edges of their scarves, growing thicker with each exhale until the fabric becomes a mask of frost. The men tug it away only for it to reform minutes later. Every breath hurts. Air scrapes through their throats like broken glass, sharp and dry. The cold sinks into their muscles, their bones, their teeth. Even thoughts seem to slow, as though the winter is, freezing the mind itself. The march becomes a trial of endurance rather than progress. Every step is labour, every mile punishment. Snowdrifts conceal the true shape of the road. What looks like smooth ground hides potholes deep enough to snap an ankle or twist a knee. What looks like a curve could actually be a ditch filled with frozen mud. The men advance carefully, leaning forward into the wind that howls down from the north. It claws at their coats, tearing at their hands, prying beneath their collars. Some swear the wind carries voices soft, distant, calling from the direction of the city they have not yet reached. The vehicles suffer more than the men. Engines sputter as fuel thickens in the tanks. Oil freezes in its lines. Tracks of armored vehicles snap under the stress of frost. Tires crack like old leather. Mechanics work furiously, striking metal with hammers that ring out into the cold night with hollow, hopeless notes. They light fires beneath engines, but the flames flicker weakly, devoured by the freezing air before they can warm anything. Entire columns halt as trucks stall and artillery locks in place. The officers shout orders, but their voices emerge as feeble clouds of steam, swallowed instantly by the surrounding emptiness. The snow continues falling, soft, beautiful, merciless. Visibility shrinks. Men walk directly into snowdrifts that swallow them waist deep. A few never climb out, too exhausted to fight the weight of the snow pressing against them. Others collapse on the roadside, their bodies curling inward as if trying to protect themselves from the cold. A comrade shakes them. No response. Frost gathers on their eyelashes, sealing their eyes shut forever. The Soviets strike suddenly and sharply. They appear at the edges of the road, figures in white camouflage moving through the snowfall with eerie silence. Their rifles remain unfrozen, their breathing steady, their movements sure in a winter they know better than any enemy. They fire into the column, ducking behind drifts that hide them completely. Machine gun fire coughs from behind frozen logs. Mortars thump softly in the distance, their shells falling like thorns into the white-covered earth. The Germans respond slowly, clumsily, their fingers too numb to operate their weapons swiftly. Their bullets miss, their guns jam, their coordination dissolves into chaos. The ambushes are not large, but they are constant wearing down morale, destroying equipment, cutting supply lines thread by thread. The march to Moscow becomes less a movement and more a bleeding. Even in brief moments of quiet, the men feel the weight of the approaching city not with excitement, not with triumph, but with dread. Moscow is no longer a destination. It is a shadow, a silence, a looming presence felt through the soles of frozen boots and the tremors of distant artillery carried on the wind. Sometimes, at dusk, when the snow glows faintly blue beneath the fading light, soldiers stop and stare toward the distant horizon where the city lies. They do not see lights, they do not see buildings. They see only a horizon thick with storm clouds and falling flakes. The men whisper to one another that Moscow feels less like a city now, and more like a force, an idea wrapped in cold and defended by winter itself. The nearer they come, the whiter the world becomes. The more the cold tightens its grip, the more the land seems to shake its head and whisper, "No farther." The road to Moscow is no longer a path. It is a warning written in snow. Moscow rises from the frozen plain like a dream wrapped in smoke. At first, it appears only as a blur on the horizon, a dark mass against the white, flickering faintly in the distance as searchlights sweep the sky. But as the German forces crawl closer through the worsening winter, the city reveals itself piece by piece. The jagged silhouettes of factories, the spires of ancient towers, the faint glow of fires burning behind shuttered windows. Moscow does not shimmer with hope or fear. It stands with something heavier, something unyielding. The men approaching it feel the change before they see it. The air thickens, the cold sharpens, the silence deepens. The closer they get, the more the land seems to resist. Trenches appear where hours earlier there had been flat snow. Anti-tank obstacles rise like iron teeth from the frozen earth. And everywhere are footprints, thousands of them, crisscrossing the white landscape in chaotic patterns. Evidence of a city mobilizing itself with a determination that does not waver despite the cold. Inside Moscow, the preparation is relentless. Old men with trembling hands drag sandbags across Red Square. Women with scarves wrapped tight over their hair dig trenches beneath the shadow of the Kremlin's towers. Students haul crates of ammunition. Children gather firewood from bombed-out buildings. Tram drivers turn mechanics. Clerks turn soldiers. Musicians trade their instruments for rifles. Factory workers load artillery shells in the same rhythm with which they once forged steel. A city of millions breathes as one. The Soviet commanders know the enemy is close, too close. But they also know something the invaders have failed to understand. That winter can be weaponized, that cold can be trained, that a city with its back to the wall will not break easily. So they dig deeper. They string barbed wire along icy boulevards. They mount machine guns in apartment windows. They fortify storm drains, basements, rooftops, stairwells, transforming every inch of Moscow into a labyrinth of resistance. And the people do not flee. They stay. They refuse to abandon the beating heart of their nation. German soldiers, exhausted by the march, stumble into positions on the outskirts. Their uniforms stiffen with frost. Their faces crack with cold. The barrels of their rifles freeze, then thaw, then freeze again. They look upon the city with hollow eyes, trying to comprehend how anything could still stand. They expected fear. They expected surrender. They expected something brittle. What they find is resolve. One evening, as the sun sinks behind the ice-choked horizon, a German company creeps forward toward a cluster of buildings west of the city. Their boots crunch in the snow. Their breath fogs in the air. A faint light glows in the windows, perhaps candles, perhaps fires kept low to avoid detection. The men raise their rifles, inching closer. Then the windows go dark. All at once, the silence hangs, thick, unsettling. Moments later, gunfire erupts sharp, precise, emerging from the very buildings that had seemed abandoned seconds before. The Soviets fire from behind broken bricks, from cellar windows, from rooftops. The Germans return fire, but the cold has made their fingers stiff and their aim unsteady. A machine gun jams. A mortar round fails to launch. Panic mixes with frost. The city does not let them pass. Even at night, the assaults continue. Soviet soldiers in fur-lined coats move through the snow with the confidence of men who have lived in winter all their lives. They strike fast, vanishing just as quickly. They attack not for territory, but for time. Every hour they hold is another hour the German advance slows, another hour winter grows stronger. The city burns in places, warehouses, factories, rail yards, but the fires do not consume it. They illuminate it. Flames lick the sky, sending showers of sparks into the cold night, like beacons calling the defenders to rise again. And rise they do. Even the wounded crawl back into position, determined to hold Moscow's gates with whatever strength remains in their frostbitten bodies. Some fight until their rifles freeze. Others fight until their hands do. The city absorbs their sacrifice, building its defense from the grit of those who will not surrender. The Germans had believed Moscow was an objective, something to be reached, taken, declared. But now they see the truth. Moscow is not a city, it is a force, a heartbeat, a refusal cast in stone and frost. And like winter itself, it will not fall simply because someone demands it. Not today, not tomorrow, not while it still breathes. The city that stands before them is no prize. It is a promise, a warning, a line they were never meant to cross. The cold reaches its deepest point before anyone hears the first sign of the counterstrike. It is a cold so profound that even the snow seems to retreat from its own hardness. Boots no longer sink, they scrape. Breath no longer drifts. It crystallizes instantly, clinging to scarves and eyelashes in tiny white needles. The world feels brittle enough to shatter. German soldiers crouch near makeshift fires that barely glow, their hands stiff, their minds drifting in and out of a dull, exhausted haze. Then, at dawn, the silence fractures. It begins with a faint tremor underfoot so subtle it could be imagination, a whisper of vibration threading through the frozen ground. Some soldiers lift their heads, blinking sleep from their eyes. Others rub their ears, thinking it the groan of metal contracting in the cold. But the tremor grows, deepens, becomes steady. Then, through the thick white air, comes the sound, muffled at first, then rising, then unmistakable. Engines, dozens, hundreds. The men scramble to their feet just as the horizon flickers with movement shadows emerging from the snow-filled mist. They are white shapes at first, barely distinguishable from the landscape. Then the shapes sharpen into figures, Soviet soldiers in winter camouflage, their coats the color of frost, their faces wrapped against the cold. They move like the snow itself, quiet, controlled, relentless. Behind them, more shadows grow. Tanks. But not the ones the Germans are used to. These machines roar through the snow with confidence, their wide tracks gliding over drifts that bog down German vehicles. Frost and ice cling to their armour like extra plating. The T-34 seconds lead the charge as if winter has forged them, not hindered them. The German front line shudders. Orders ring out muffled, frantic. Soldiers grab rifles that resist their frozen fingers. Machine guns jam after 2 bursts. Mortars fail to ignite. The cold has hollowed out their arsenal, turned their firepower to brittle metal and silent steel. The Soviets hit like a falling sky. They crash into trenches with bayonets gleaming through the frost. Their rifles fire in rapid bursts, unaffected by the cold that sabotages German bolts. Grenades arc through the air, their explosions muffled by the snow but deadly nonetheless. German soldiers fall back in disarray, slipping on ice, stumbling through drifts that reach their knees. The counterstrike wasn't expected today. Not this early, not this fierce. But the Soviets have been waiting for this moment, waiting for winter to finish, softening the invaders. Now it is here, and so are they. The battlefield becomes a white storm of chaos. German officers shout commands drowned beneath the rumble of Soviet armor. Tracks churn through trenches, throwing snow and earth into the air. Infantry surge behind them, moving with practiced ease, their winter training turning them into wraiths under the pale sun. The Germans fire back desperately. A few weapons crack back to life. Some artillery pieces, warmed by hours of frantic effort, spit shells into the advancing masses. But the defense buckles. The cold has robbed their strength, dulled their reflexes, clouded their judgment. Every movement takes twice the effort. Every shot, twice the will. Meanwhile, the men of the Red Army move like they were born in this hell. They flank, they press, they surround, and the Germans feel themselves shrinking, shrinking, shrinking. A company on the right collapses first, then another. Machine gunners abandon frozen weapons, stumbling backward through snowdrifts. Medics drag wounded men whose limbs are stiff from cold rather than pain. Officers attempt to regroup their units, but the Soviet assault splits them apart like cracking ice. In the midst of the storm, one German soldier sees it clearly what their commanders could not. This is not a counterattack born of strategy. It is born of survival, of vengeance, of winter itself reclaiming the land. The Soviets push until the sun sinks behind a sky of ice. Then they push farther. When night falls, the battlefield is a torn expanse of snow, stained grey with powder and red with blood. The Germans who remain fall back through the drifts, their bodies failing, their spirits cracking. They leave rifles behind, frozen, jammed, useless. They leave equipment half buried in the snow. They leave comrades sitting upright, lifeless, encased in frost. Behind them, the Soviets secure their ground, their breath misting through the darkness, like the exhale of the winter itself. The counterstrike is not merely a battle. It is the moment the Germans realize the truth they feared most. They did not march into Russia. They marched into winter. And winter has come alive. They come first as whispers carried on the wind, stories passed between shivering sentries, murmured by medics over dim lantern light, muttered by officers with furrowed brows. The stories speak of shapes moving across the white horizon, swift and silent, of footsteps discovered around supply depots though no tracks lead away, of men vanishing during night patrols, leaving only a scattering of shell casings or a rifle half buried in snow. The men call them wolves, not the four-legged kind, the other kind, the human kind, partisans, guerrillas, ghosts of the steppe. Whatever name the soldiers choose, it never feels like enough. These fighters do not move like armies, nor like soldiers trained in the drills of Europe. They move like the land, quiet, patient, merciless. The first encounter happens at dusk. A German supply convoy crawls across a frozen plain, its trucks laden with dwindling rations and shells that rattle softly inside metal crates. The roads are barely roads, just faint tracks carved through snow by countless desperate wheels. The sky glows with a sickly blue. the last light of day slipping behind the horizon. Then, from the distant tree line, a flicker, a movement, a shadow. One soldier sees it and shouts. Another raises a rifle. But as they squint into the cold, there is nothing there. Only trees black, skeletal, motionless. The men relax. They breathe out long trails of steam. The first shot cracks across the plain like a whip. It hits the lead driver squarely between the eyes. He slumps over the wheel, and the truck veers off the path, nose deep into a drift. Chaos erupts. Men scramble for cover, slipping on ice, shouting into the wind, but the enemy is already gone. Only the echo of the shot remains. More attacks follow, small, precise, unforgiving. A sniper fires one round from behind a fallen log, hitting a soldier through the heart, then melts into the trees before the Germans can even return fire. A squad disappears while scouting a Pat village, their tracks leading into a barn but never out again. A pair of engineers tasked with repairing a bridge are found the next morning, lying beside their tools, snow covering their faces like a burial shroud. The earth itself seems to turn traitor. Mines appear where none existed. Sled tracks snake through forests unseen by patrols. Explosives detonate beneath supply wagons at the very moment they cross a narrow pass. Even the horses grow restless, ears flicking, nostrils flaring, hooves stamping nervously at the scent of unseen danger. The Germans' fire flares into the night sky. They illuminate nothing. They reveal everything. Forest lines bristle with movement, snowdrifts shift, shadows scatter. Some soldiers swear they see eyes staring at them from the dark, wide, unblinking predator's eyes. Others insist they hear soft whistles on the wind, signals traded between hunters closing in on prey. At night, the terror deepens. The cold becomes a second enemy. The darkness becomes a third. Fires are forbidden, too visible, too dangerous, so the men lie curled in frozen trenches, listening to the distant howls echoing across the plains. Sometimes those howls belong to wolves with fur. Often they do not. Ammunition goes missing. Rations vanish. Messages fail to arrive. The supply lines, lifelines stretched thin across vast distances, become easy prey. Entire truckloads of food burn in sudden explosions, the flames licking the sky as helpless soldiers watch from afar. The partisans know where to strike, how to strike, when to strike. They know the land in ways the invaders never will. To the Germans, the winter feels like a trap, but to the Soviets living through it, it is a home. Somewhere in the forests, partisans gather around small, hidden fires. Their breath warms their hands, their rifles rest against tree trunks, their boots dry beside embers. They whisper plans in the flickering glow and vanish again into the night. They fight not for a front line, not for a commander, not for orders printed on paper. They fight for their homes, their dead, their frozen land, and they fight with the patience of wolves. By dawn, the German soldiers realize an unbearable truth. Even when the Red Army retreats, the war does not retreat with it. It lingers, it stalks. It waits behind every tree, beneath every drift, inside every silence. The wolves of the steppe are everywhere, and they are never alone. The blizzard does not arrive suddenly. It gathers, it coils, it thickens in the sky over hours, like a great white creature stretching its limbs before striking. The men see the early signs, the distant horizon swallowed by pale haze, the wind changing pitch, the snow rising in slow spirals from the ground as if the earth is exhaling ice. But exhaustion makes these signs easy to ignore. They have learned to fear storms, but they have not yet learned to fear this. Then the sky falls. The first gust slams into the column with the force of a physical blow, bending trees and extinguishing lanterns. The second gust brings snow thick, violent, disorienting. It is not the soft snowfall of early winter. It strikes like thrown sand, stinging the skin, burning the eyes. Within minutes, visibility shrinks to an arm's length. Within an hour, to nothing at all. And still, they must retreat. German soldiers huddle together, leaning into the wind as they stumble across the frozen ground. Their coats snap like sails in a storm. Their faces vanish behind scarves turned to sheets of frost. Each breath knifes through their lungs, snow piles onto their shoulders, onto their packs, onto their helmets, turning them into moving mounds of white misery. The officers shout orders, but their voices vanish instantly into the whirlwind. Left becomes right, forward becomes nowhere. Direction becomes a memory. The retreat splinters. Groups of men break off unintentionally, pushed away from the main body by walls of wind. Some veer into forests where the branches whip at their faces. Others stagger across open plains where the snow lies in uneven drifts higher than a man's waist. Trucks buried by the storm appear and disappear again under the snow, like ghosts half swallowed by the land. A soldier collapses, then another, then another. Each fall is quiet. No cry, no plea, just the thud of a body hitting snow, followed by silence. Comrades try to lift them, shaking them, calling to them through layers of frost. But the fallen men's eyes are glassy, their limbs stiffening already. The living are forced to abandon them. There is no time, there is no strength. Horses fare no better. Their flanks shake beneath frozen hides. Ice clings to their nostrils. Some drop in place, legs buckling beneath the weight of snow and exhaustion. The men cut them loose from their harnesses and trudge on, leaving the animals behind as black shapes sinking into white. And the Soviets are not far behind. Somewhere in the storm, distant cracks echo rifle fire, muffled by the blizzard. Soviet patrols move through the storm with a confidence the Germans cannot comprehend. They have grown within these winters. They navigate by instinct, by memory of the land. They travel in small groups, emerging from the swirling snow like phantoms, before disappearing again in seconds. The retreating soldiers fire wildly when they glimpse movement, but their bullets vanish into the storm. Their hands shake, their rifles freeze, their minds fray beneath the relentless cold. Night is the worst. Temperatures plummet until men feel their eyelids freezing shut when they blink. Fires are impossible. The wind kills flames before they can take root. The darkness is absolute, no stars, no moon, just the swirling white void. The men dig shallow pits in the snow, curling into them like animals burrowing for warmth. But the cold finds them anyway, crawling beneath coats and into bones. Some never wake. Others wake, screaming, hands numb, feet numb, faces blackened with frostbite. In the morning, if it can be called morning, the storm shows no sign of stopping. The sky is a pale, churning ocean. The men move as if underwater, every step a battle, every breath a gamble. They lose equipment, they lose direction, they lose each other. The land keeps taking. By the time the blizzard finally loosens its grip, the retreat is a fraction of what it had been. The survivors emerge from the storm, hollow-eyed and ghost-like, their beards and hair clotted with ice, their boots torn open, their skin numb and grey. They collapse beside burned-out trucks and abandoned artillery, their bodies stiff with cold, their spirits cracked by the merciless weather. They have escaped the Soviets, but they have not escaped the East. The blizzard has taken more than bullets ever could, and something inside each survivor has frozen a piece of spirit, a piece of memory, a piece of hope left behind in the snow. The retreat is not over, but the men are. Winter has begun its harvest. There comes a point somewhere between exhaustion and despair when the soldiers realize the war is no longer measured by battles, but by distances between them. Distances made of snow, distances made of silence, distances made of white that stretches so far and so endlessly that even memory begins to fade inside it. The front line dissolves into this emptiness. So do the roads, so do the days. The survivors of the blizzard trudge onward, not because orders push them, but because stopping means freezing where they stand. The landscape around them has been washed clean of features, hills, trees, ravines, all flattened beneath a thick crust of snow. Even the sky melts into the world below, a pale, indistinguishable sheet of grey and white that erases the line between ground and heavens. Some men march with eyes half closed, their bodies on autopilot, their minds drifting into dull, numb corners where no fear can reach them. Others stare straight ahead as though hypnotized by the monotony. A few stumble from the path, wandering sideways into the featureless plains until comrades yank them back. Direction is a fragile thing in the endless white. Reality is too. Every few kilometers, the soldiers pass the remains of the blizzard's victims, bundles of dark fabric half buried beneath snow, hands sticking upward toward a sky that offers no warmth. The wind has sculpted drifts around the corpses, turning them into strange mounds rising from the frozen earth. No one stops to bury them. No one has the strength. The snow performs the burial itself, slowly, methodically, until nothing remains but a slight rise in the whiteness. The silence grows unbearable. It is not peace. It is not calm. It is suffocation. Sound vanishes into the vastness, footsteps muffled, breaths swallowed, conversations lost before they form. Even the metallic clink of a rifle strap or the rattling of a canteen feels muted, as though the air itself is too heavy to carry noise. The men speak, seldom. When they do, their voices sound foreign, brittle, as if belonging to someone else entirely. Night brings no relief. The darkness only deepens the white. Moonlight reflects off the snow in a pale glow that feels unnatural, like walking through a dream made of frost. Shadows become strange, elongated things. Figures appear at the edge of vision, figures that vanish when looked at directly. The men tell themselves it is imagination. They do not mention that imagination has begun speaking in full sentences. The cold plays tricks. So does hunger. So does fear. Some soldiers swear they hear music carried on the wind, distant, wavering notes of a balalaika or the low hum of a choir. Others claim to hear whispers in languages they cannot understand. One man insists he sees a line of women walking across the plain, their skirts trailing behind them like shadows. Another believes he sees his brother standing beside a frozen stream. All hallucinations. All symptoms of a land, too, vast for human minds to hold. But a few visions are not hallucinations. At times, Soviet reconnaissance units drift along the horizon, silhouettes barely distinguishable from snowdrifts. They observe without engaging, waiting, judging, sometimes disappearing before the Germans can confirm they were ever there at all. The Red Army does not need to attack, they only need to exist, to remind the exhausted soldiers that they are not alone in the white void. Supplies dwindle, fires are forbidden, compass needles freeze, maps become meaningless. The retreat slows to a crawl, and every hour feels stretched into days. The men lose track of time, they lose track of distance, they lose track of themselves. A soldier collapses from exhaustion, his comrades lift him. He collapses again and does not rise. They press on. Another begins mumbling hymns under his breath. He clutches at his scarf as if strangling himself, trying to warm his own breath. He walks into a drift and begins digging with bare hands. They pull him away. Another simply stops walking, looking upward with glazed eyes as snow settles on his lashes. He smiles once before his body stiffens. They do not stop. The white swallows everything. The men, their thoughts, their past, their future. Only the cold remains, only the snow, and the endless distance between battles, a distance that begins to feel more lethal than any enemy they have faced. In this white world, the war fades into background noise. The true fight becomes survival itself, a lonely, quiet struggle fought step by step across a frozen desert that seems determined to erase every trace of their existence. And many will not reach the next battle. The endless white will claim them first. The first fire is lit out of desperation, not comfort. A small cluster of soldiers huddle behind a half-collapsed barn, shielding the match from the wind with trembling hands. It takes 5 tries before the flame catches on a scrap of paper torn from a frozen ration wrapper. The fire grows weakly, reluctantly, like a living thing too starved to rise. The men lean in, their faces hollow, eyes reflecting the flicker as though seeing light for the first time in weeks. But the warmth never comes. The flame dances, bright enough to paint their faces in gold, but the heat it gives off seems to evaporate inches from their skin. The cold is too deep, too vast, too rooted in the air. It presses in from all sides, swallowing the fire's warmth before it reaches their fingers. The men extend their hands closer, closer, until their gloves brush the flame's edge. Only then do they feel the faintest whisper of heat. It is not enough. More fires appear across the makeshift camp, tiny, shivering dots scattered across the frozen wasteland. They glow like dying stars on the horizon, each surrounded by clusters of soldiers who sit motionless, trying to convince themselves the warmth is real. They feed the flames with scraps of wood, torn cloth, even pieces of broken crates. The fuel burns quickly. The cold returns quicker. Even the fires look exhausted. Smoke rises slowly, trailing upward in thin grey lines that twist in the wind before vanishing into the pale night sky. The smell of burning pine mixes with the metallic scent of frostbitten skin. Sparks leap upward, only to die mid-air, extinguished by the cold before they can drift more than a few inches. The fire cracks and pops, but there is no comfort in the sound, only a reminder that wood burns faster in winter and supplies are limited. A soldier removes his gloves and holds out his bare hands. He winces. The heat hurts. Not because it is too hot, but because his fingers are so numb that sensation returns, in sharp, stabbing bursts. He pulls his hands away, flexing them painfully, before covering them again. The cold laughs silently. Some men fall asleep beside the flames, their bodies slumping forward. Their comrades jolt them awake, shaking them violently. Sleep too close to the fire, and the warmth can trick the mind into letting go. The soldiers fear the cold, but they fear the warmth more. Warmth invites sleep. Sleep invites death. The officers move through the camp, checking on their men. Their coats are lined with frost. Their breath emerges in thick clouds. They kneel beside fires, feeling the embers with gloved hands. They know they cannot allow the flames to die. Even if the fires fail to warm, their light alone keeps despair at bay. Across the plain, the Soviets watch unseen. They see the faint glow of German fires flickering on distant hillsides. Soft orange points of light trembling in the dark like the eyes of wounded animals. The Soviets know the fires burn small, weak, cold. They know the enemy suffers not from battle, but from nature itself. Somewhere in the tree line, a Soviet scout crouches and observes the tiny, struggling flames. He does not fire. He does not move. He simply watches. The winter is doing the work for him. By midnight, the wind changes. A low howl spreads across the plain, twisting through the camp, bending flames sideways until they nearly gutter out. Snow drifts into the fire pits. Men scramble to protect what little warmth remains. But the wind is relentless, sharp as knives, cold enough to steal breath from the lungs. Some fires die. Some survive. None truly warm. A soldier breaks down, sobbing quietly into his scarf. His tears freeze in seconds. His friend wraps an arm around him, but the gesture provides no more heat than the fire does. By dawn, the camp is a field of smouldering embers and frost-covered bodies. Some men sit upright, unmoving, their eyes open but their hearts still. Others shiver uncontrollably, whispering prayers in voices too weak to carry. The fires have burned all night, but the cold has won. When the sun finally rises, weak, feeble, pale, it reveals a landscape unchanged by the night's struggle. The snow remains, the frost remains, the wind remains, the cold remains, and the fires that should have saved them still sit in their pits blackened, shrunken, defeated. They flicker faintly one last time before extinguishing themselves. The men move on, leaving behind the cold ashes of a night that took more from them than any battle could. Because on the Eastern Front, even fire bends to winter, and no flame, no matter how big, the cold reaches the city long before the enemy does. It rolls over the roofs at dawn, whispering along frozen gutters, slipping beneath the doors of cramped wooden apartments. Leningrad wakes to a sky the color of steel and a silence that drifts through the streets like an omen. The factories cough their first plumes of smoke into the air, but even the chimneys seem subdued as if the frost has placed its hand across their throats. The first shells fall before noon. At first, they sound distant, faint thumps carried by the wind across the frozen lakes. People look up from their morning chores, pausing mid-step, water buckets trembling in their hands. They listen. Another thump. Another. And then the ground trembles just slightly beneath their feet. A woman opens her window to peer down the street, only to see neighbors doing the same, their breath mingling in the cold air. The siege has begun. By afternoon, the roads are blocked, bridges guarded, rail lines cut. The city so vast, it feels like its own world suddenly becomes an island, surrounded by forces tightening like a fist. News spreads in murmurs. The enemy has encircled the city, slicing off every artery that once fed it. Bread trucks halted, supply trains halted. Evacuation routes vanished like breath on glass. The people of Leningrad brace themselves with a quiet determination that comes not from courage, but from necessity. Inside the city, soldiers and civilians move as one. They barricade windows with furniture. They carry sandbags up stairwells, forming makeshift walls along rooftops. Children gather wood from abandoned sheds. Teachers, factory workers, cooks, everyone finds a task, a purpose. The city becomes a machine of survival, each person a gear turning under the weight of the coming winter. The shelling grows heavier. Explosions bloom across the skyline, orange flowers in the ashen air. Glass shatters. Buildings tremble. Snow drifts downward from rooftops, shaken loose by the impact. On Nevsky Prospect, people dive for cover in doorways as the windows burst outward in a shower of shards. A tram sits frozen on its tracks, abandoned mid-route, its passengers sprinting toward the nearest shelter. Yet even as the bombs fall, the cold does not retreat. It deepens. The city's pipes freeze. Water pumps fail. The great river Neva turns to stone beneath a skin of ice so thick it could hold the weight of a horse. People break holes in the surface with crowbars to drink the water beneath, the steam rising from the opening like breath from a dying throat. Rations shrink. Families gather around tiny stoves that burn whatever they can find. Chair legs, old books, wooden toys. Soup becomes water flavored with memory. Bread becomes a mixture of flour stretched with sawdust, barley husks, and ground cellulose. Hunger claws at the city's belly, sharp and unrelenting. The enemy keeps their distance. They know the cold will do what shells cannot. At night, the sky glows faintly, red from distant fires. The city listens to the whine of bombers overhead. Tracer rounds streak across the darkness like burning threads. Children curl beneath blankets, trembling. Parents whisper reassurances they do not believe. But the spirit of the city does not break. On a freezing night, in a concert hall without electricity, musicians gather in coats and gloves. They play through numb fingers, their notes rising above the bombarded streets like a fragile prayer. Civilians pack the hall, their breath fogging the air. The music drifts across the frozen city, floating through cracked windows and over snow-covered rooftops. The siege tightens with every passing day, every passing night. The roads outside the city fill with enemy guns. Artillery lines stare down the avenues like metal wolves. The blockade is sealed. No food, no fuel, no escape. Leningrad becomes a frozen island, a city of hunger, a fortress of frost and will. And yet, despite every hardship, every shell, every cold breath dragged through starving lungs, one truth takes root in the heart of every survivor. The city will not fall, not to winter, not to hunger, not to an army waiting outside the walls. Leningrad refuses to kneel. In the silence between explosions, with snow drifting down like slow white ash, the city tightens its coat, lifts its chin, and prepares to endure a nightmare that will last not weeks or months, but years, a siege carved from frost, fire, and human endurance strong enough to outlast even death. The lake freezes slowly, silently, as if trying not to draw attention to itself. Day by day, the water beneath the thin November sun grows sluggish, thick, reluctant. Ice forms first along the shoreline, thin white veins stretching across the black surface like frostbitten fingers. The fishermen who once worked these waters shake their heads, muttering that the season has come too soon, too fast. But the cold does not wait for permission. It tightens, it deepens, it hardens. By December, Lake Ladoga becomes a sheet of dull, opaque glass. Snow settles atop it in uneven patches, masking the cracks that snake along its surface. The people of Leningrad gather along the shore, gazing across the frozen expanse. Beyond it lies life, food, fuel, medicine. Behind them lies the starving city. Someone whispers its name for the first time. The road of life. It does not feel like a road. It feels like a gamble with death. The first trucks approach cautiously, like animals sniffing the air, before committing to a dangerous crossing. Their engines cough in the cold. Their headlights are covered to avoid drawing fire. Soldiers circle around them, stomping their feet against the frozen ground, watching as engineers test the ice with long iron poles. The poles crack occasionally. Everyone hears it. Everyone flinches. The order is given anyway. There is no choice. Leningrad cannot wait. The first truck rolls onto the ice. The sound is unbearable, groaning, splitting, humming like the lake is speaking beneath the weight. The wheels spin slightly before gripping the frozen surface. The truck moves forward inch by inch. The driver's knuckles whiten around the wheel. His breath fogs the glass. He does not blink. He does not dare. And for a moment, the ice holds. Another truck follows, then another, then a convoy. Each one leaves a thin, trembling trail in the frost behind it. Above them, the sky darkens with the roar of German aircraft. The enemy knows what is happening. Shells begin to fall distant, thuds shaking, snow loose from the shoreline pines. The ice shivers from the impact. Shockwaves ripple across its surface in long, trembling rings. But the trucks continue. They must. The city is starving. Inside Leningrad, lines curl around shattered bakeries before dawn. Children stamp their feet in the cold, clutching ration cards with raw fingers. Mothers wait with empty buckets. The air smells of smoke, snow, and hunger. Every hour without supplies brings new deaths. Every night the frost claims more. And so the ice road becomes a lifeline, thin, fragile, defiant. Night crossings are the worst. The darkness swallows the horizon. The air crystallizes in lungs. Headlights are forbidden. Drivers navigate by memory, by faint moonlight, by the distant glow of artillery flashes. Beneath them, the lake moans those long, deep groans that sound like the earth itself is straining. Sometimes the cracks appear without warning. A loud snap, a violent shudder. A chunk of ice falling away. A truck vanishes in seconds, swallowed whole by the black water. The sound of it, metal-throated, final echoes across the lake. The convoy halts, men shout. Ropes are thrown. But there is nothing to save. Only bubbles and silence. The line moves again. Fear rides with every driver. Sweat freezes in their eyebrows. Fingers numb on the steering wheel. They drive with their jaws clenched, senses sharpened by terror. To stop is to die. To turn back is to starve the city. Some pray, most do not. Winter hears prayers and does nothing. But somehow, night after night, storm after storm, the road holds just enough. Supplies trickle into the city. Food is rationed with trembling hands. Babies taste sugar for the first time in months. A dying man receives a spoonful of soup and whispers thank you through cracked lips. The ice road becomes myth, becomes hope, becomes sacrifice. On one crossing, a truck loaded with flour overturns. The soldiers, starving themselves, scoop what they can into sacks with bare, frost-bitten hands. Another truck burns on the ice after a shell hits it, the flames reflecting orange against the frozen lake like a funeral pyre. Drivers pull comrades from the wreck, dragging them across the ice as it splinters beneath their boots. Yet still they return to the wheel. Still they cross again, and again, and again. The lake takes lives, but it gives more back. By late winter, the road of life carries not only supplies into Leningrad, but children out of it bundled in blankets, eyes wide with fear and frost, carried across the ice in trucks that rattle like bones. Their breath fogs the air with small ghosts. Some cry, some sleep, some simply stare. Behind them, the city remains, suffering, enduring, alive. The siege tightens, the winter deepens, the ice cracks, but the road stands slender, fragile, miraculous, a white artery pulsing between death and defiance. Across this frozen bridge, humanity crawls forward one trembling mile at a time, refusing to die in the dark. The mountains rise before the soldiers like an impossible wall, vast, jagged, white, and ancient. The Caucasus Range, crowned with snow and sharpened by centuries of wind, stands against the winter sky in a silence so profound it feels sacred. Even the most hardened men stop when they first see it, breath catching in their throats. The peaks seem to float above the clouds, ghostly and ominous, as if belonging to another world entirely. The cold here is different. It is not the cold of the plains. It is a higher, older cold, thin as glass, sharp as obsidian. It cuts the air into ribbons, slicing through wool coats and thick scarves, as though they were nothing more than damp paper. Every exhale turns instantly to crystals that glitter briefly before disappearing into the thin, icy wind. Boots sink into powdery drifts that hide rocks sharp enough to tear leather apart. The sky is a pale, faded blue, but it offers no warmth, only space for the wind to gather speed before it slams into the men on the slopes. The climb begins at dawn. German soldiers, burdened with rifles, ammunition, and packs heavy with equipment, trudge upward along narrow goat paths carved into the mountainside. The paths twist dangerously, some no wider than a single boot. One misstep means a fall into a ravine so deep the bottom seems lost to shadow. The men cling to ropes hammered into frozen stone, fingers trembling from cold and fear. Their breath comes in harsh gasps, each one burning their lungs with air that feels too thin to sustain life. And yet they climb. Behind them, their supply mules stagger and slip, hooves skidding against ice that fractures beneath their weight. Some animals lose their footing entirely, tumbling down steep slopes and vanishing into the white void below. The men do not look back. They cannot afford to. Every ounce of strength must go toward the ascent. Halfway up the ridge, the Soviets strike, not from ahead, but from above. Figures in white camouflage crouch behind snow-laden boulders, nearly invisible against the mountainside. They fire down onto the climbing troops with disciplined precision, their bullets sparking against rock or finding exposed flesh. German soldiers flatten themselves against the cliff face, clinging to icy stone as they try to return fire. But aiming uphill is nearly impossible. Rifles shake in numb hands, and the angle sends shots harmlessly into the sky. Avalanches become weapons, sometimes deliberately triggered, sometimes merely the result of a single bullet hitting a fragile overhang. The snow breaks free with a soft rumble that grows into a monstrous roar. Walls of white cascade down the mountainside, swallowing men and equipment in seconds. Shouts vanish under the roar. The ground trembles as tons of snow thunder past, leaving behind smooth, silent slopes where the path once was. The men who survive dig desperately through the snow, searching for comrades who will never be found. Higher still, the wind becomes a beast of its own. It tears at coats, steals hats, rips maps from hands, and slaps faces with icy claws. It howls through narrow passes, a sound so mournful it feels alive. The men lean into it, bodies bent at unnatural angles, boots sliding on icy ledges. Snowflakes cut across their cheeks like tiny blades. At nighttime, the mountains become a realm of shadows. The temperature plummets so fast it feels like stepping from the world of the living into something ancient and indifferent. Tents flap wildly, poles creaking beneath the weight of frost. Men huddle in groups, sharing body heat, rubbing their hands to keep blood flowing. Fires barely catch wood is too scarce, too cold, too damp. Even when the flames rise, the heat escapes instantly into the vast, frozen air above them. The Soviets move with eerie confidence. They know the mountains. Their ancestors lived and died on these slopes. They navigate the ridges like ghosts. Often, they attack at twilight just when exhaustion pulls at the German soldiers' minds. Shadows flicker between boulders. Shots echo across the peaks. Men shout into the thinning air. And then silence returns, the kind that presses against the ears until they ache. By the time the Germans gain even a few kilometers, they are half starved, half frozen, and wholly defeated by the land itself. Every step forward feels like defying a god. Every ridge conquered reveals another higher, sharper, crueler. Snowstorms roll in without warning, thick curtains of white that erase the world within seconds. The men cling to each other, to ropes, to the belief that forward is the only direction left. But the mountains do not care for belief. They do not care for war. They do not care for men. And so the Germans climb and fall and freeze and bleed. While above them, the peaks watch in silence, ancient, unmoved, untouched, as winter decides who lives, who dies, and who disappears forever into the white. The first heat of summer arrives like an insult, shameless and brutal after months of cold that nearly broke the armies on both sides. The snow melts into sucking mud for a brief, miserable interlude, and then almost overnight, the land transforms. The endless white gives way to an endless yellow, a sea of dry grass stretching in every direction beneath a sun that burns with a merciless indifference. The steppe is reborn, but it is not gentle. It wakes angry. Grass crackles underfoot. The air shimmers with rising heat, turning distant shapes into wavering ghosts. Dust hangs in a permanent haze, settling into hair, uniforms, lungs. The men cough until their throats feel lined with sand. Their boots fill with grit. Their eyes burn. And the wind, once a carrier of frost, now drags sheets of dust across the plain like dry waves rolling over the bones of the winter dead. The soldiers walk through it like men in a fever dream. German units, reduced to fractions of their original strength, press forward through the parched fields. Their uniforms hang loose from weight loss, their sunburned faces taut with exhaustion. The cold stole their sleep. The heat now steals their breath. The steppe offers no shade, no water, no pity. Even the sky seems farther away, a flat white bowl reflecting heat downward like the lid of a furnace. The Soviets return to the land with a new fire in their eyes. They move across the steppe the way wind moves across grass, swift, coordinated, relentless. Their tanks, repaired through the spring and hardened by experience, thunder across the plains in a low, rolling roar that shakes the earth. Dust plumes behind them like long, golden banners. Infantry ride on the hulls, clutching rifles and machine guns, shouting over the roar of engines. And when they hit fast. A German outpost on a small rise sees the dust first, just a faint line on the horizon. Then another, then more. Within minutes, the horizon is alive with motion, as if the earth itself is pushing an army forward. The soldiers scramble into firing positions, but their rifles jam from the dust, their machine guns overheat, and their artillery shells land wide as the mirage-like air distorts their aim. The Soviets strike like lightning, short bursts, hard blows, precise and punishing. The Germans fight back, but the heat saps their strength. Sweat pours down their faces, soaking their collars. Helmets grow unbearably hot beneath the sun. Water rations run low, too low. Men collapse mid-battle, unconscious before they hit the ground. Medics drag them behind shattered wagons, but there is little they can do. Shade is a fantasy. Cool water, a memory. The sun burns without mercy. The steppe itself becomes a weapon. Brush fires sweep across the dry grass, ignited by tracer rounds and flares. Flames race in long, devouring lines, crackling and roaring as they devour the plain. Smoke chokes the air, turning the sky a sickly orange. The heat doubles, triples. Men stumble blindly through the haze, coughing violently, eyes streaming, lungs clawing for air that no longer exists. Animals flee rabbits, foxes, even wolves running in frantic circles, blinded by smoke. Horses scream and rear, their manes catching fire. The flames spread faster than any column can outrun. Behind them, the earth smoulders, blackened and dead. The world becomes fire, not the fire of battle, but the fire of nature turning against man. The Soviets press on, through smoke, through flame, through heat that warps the very air. German lines buckle and retreat, not from fear, but from necessity. They cannot fight the land, no one can. The steppe burns with an ancient ferocity, as if reclaiming what winter temporarily surrendered. At night, the flames continue to glow long, red scars across the horizon. The air smells of ash and scorched earth. The stars disappear behind columns of smoke. The temperature drops only slightly, enough to remind the exhausted soldiers of the cold they narrowly survived, the cold that lingers in their memories like a whisper. Men sit in the darkness, staring at the glowing horizon. They do not speak. They do not need to. They understand now what they had only suspected before. The land itself is the battlefield, and the land has chosen chaos. Winter tried to freeze them. Summer now tries to burn them. And the steppe, endless, ancient, unyielding, remains the true ruler of the Eastern Front. The armies fight for ground. The ground fights back. The approach to Rzhev feels wrong before the fighting even begins. The earth is too quiet, the air too heavy, the horizon too still. Soldiers, German and Soviet alike, sense it in their bones as they trudge toward the region that history will later call the Rzhev meat grinder, a place where the land itself seems to tremble beneath the weight of what is coming. Snow still clings to the shaded hollows, while patches of thawed earth ooze with dark mud that shines like oil. The forests lean inward, tall pines crowding close as though trying to hide what lies ahead. Then the first artillery barrage begins. The sky splits open, the ground convulses. The men dive into the nearest cover, ditches, foxholes, shell craters, already filled with icy water. The shells do not fall in straight lines or careful patterns. They fall everywhere, wild, unrelenting, screaming downward with a force that feels almost personal. The earth shakes. Clumps of frozen soil fly into the air in black. Fountains, branches snap overhead. The snow, the mud, the trees all churn together into a thick, choking rain that pelts the men as they cling to the ground, praying the next shell does not bear their name. Rzhev is not a city here. It is a battlefield without edges. The lines bend, twist, and blur within days. A trench captured in the morning is lost by noon. A bunker taken at sunset becomes a grave by sunrise. The front is not a front at all, it is a knot pulled tighter and tighter with every attack, every counterattack, every desperate attempt to gain a few meters of earth. The forest floors are carpeted with roots and snow and bodies. So many bodies. The men stop counting. The officers stop asking. The land absorbs them all, turning once soft soil into a gruesome mosaic of frozen limbs and broken steel. In the trenches, mud becomes the enemy's accomplice. It clings to boots, pulls at legs, drags men downward, as if the earth itself wants to swallow them whole. Weapons jam regularly clogged with grit, snow, blood. Helmets freeze to men's hair, scarves stiffen around faces. Frostbite chews the fingertips of soldiers trying to load ammunition with trembling hands. The Soviets attack in waves, relentless, disciplined, fueled by the knowledge that taking Rzhev means tightening a noose around the retreating enemy. They come through the trees like pale shadows, their breath billowing in the cold, their rifles crackling with deadly rhythm. Some fall instantly, others stumble onward, driven by commands shouted through the roar of artillery. The Germans defend with equal ferocity. Machine guns rattle, mortars thump, grenades arc through the air like stars falling sideways. For every meter gained, the attackers leave dozens of their own behind. For every meter lost, the defenders leave just as many. The land between trenches, the no-man's land, is a nightmare of churned snow, stained grey and red. Craters overlap in chaotic patterns. Trees stand, like mangled skeletons, their branches blackened and twisted by flame. Abandoned rifles jut from the ground like grave markers. At night, the temperature plummets again. Wounded men freeze where they lie. Their bodies stiffen before dawn. The ones who survive shiver beneath thin blankets, listening to the moans drifting across the dead ground, soft, haunting reminders that the battle continues even in sleep. Wolves circle the edges of the battlefield, drawn by the scent of blood. Their howls echo through the shattered woods, mingling with the distant rumble of artillery. The commanders both sides push their men harder, This position must be taken. This position must be held. This position must not fall. But the land pays no attention to human demands. It only consumes. By now, the men no longer speak of victory. They speak of endurance, of surviving one more hour, one more night, one more attack. The front around Rzhev becomes a vortex that pulls everything into it: men, machines, time itself. Days blur into each other. Seasons shift too slowly. The sun rises reluctantly and sets without warmth. Nothing grows here. Nothing breathes easily. Everything hurts. And still the battle continues, dragging on for month after month. A silent pact between two exhausted armies that neither can withdraw, neither can advance, neither can survive unscarred. When the fighting finally begins to subside, there is no triumph, no cheering, no sense of accomplishment, only silence and ghosts, and a landscape so mangled that even the wind seems to hesitate before crossing it. The meat grinder has taken everything, and it will take more before this war is done. The heat returns long before the men are ready for it. It comes down from a sky bleached pale by the relentless sun, pressing against their backs with a heaviness that feels almost mocking. After the frozen hell of the winter and the churning mud of the thaw, the soldiers expect relief, something gentle, something forgiving. Instead, the summer of 1942 arrives like a hammer. The steppe turns brittle under the sun. The rivers shrink. The wind tastes of dust and ash. Fields once green become gold, then brown, then grey. The land dries into parchment. Tracks carved by columns of tanks become deep scars that crack at the edges. Smoke from distant villages burned in retreat or consumed by advancing units lingers in the air, drifting low like a veil of warning. Every road toward the Volga feels cursed. The men march with their collars open, sweat darkening their uniforms in wide, salt-stained patches. Their canteens grow hot in their hands. The water inside tastes of metal. Dust clings to their faces in thick layers. Their tongues swell. Their boots rub their skin raw. Flies gather around their eyes, crawling beneath helmets, slipping into the folds of softened leather. But they keep marching. Orders demand it. Maps demand it. Destiny, they are told, demands it. Stalingrad waits at the edge of the horizon, just a word for now, a shape glimpsed only in whispers. But every step toward it feels heavier, as though the land itself tries to pull them back. They pass through villages that no longer have names. Burned walls stand like black ribs against the sky. Wells are dry. Doors hang from charred hinges. Bread ovens sit cold beneath layers of ash. Not a dog, not a chicken, not a single living soul. Only silence thick enough to choke on. Sometimes, from a distance, they see smoke rising in thin curls. When they arrive, they find the remnants of a Soviet rearguard, bodies half covered by scorched grass, shell casings scattered like seeds. Pockets of resistance erupt unexpectedly. A lone machine gun hidden in a barn loft, firing until the barrel glows red. A sniper using the rafters of a destroyed cottage as a perch. A mine buried beneath a doorstep. Death sits everywhere, beneath haystacks, inside wells, behind toppled wagons. As the Germans push farther southeast, the temperature seems to climb with them. The air vibrates with heat. Tank engines overheat. Fuel evaporates. Men collapse mid-march, their knees turning to water as they drop into the dust. Some do not rise. The medics have stopped trying to save those whose eyes roll back and whose breath comes in shallow, rattling gasps. The Soviets fight differently here. They fight with time. They fight with distance. They fight with fire. Rail lines are torn up, bridges dynamited, water towers poisoned, grain stores burned. Retreating Soviet units leave behind scorched fields and gutted barns, denying the enemy a single seed of sustenance. German soldiers find only ruin, ruin, and endless stretches of heat-sickened land. Each day, the Volga grows nearer. Each day, morale sinks lower. Around campfires that do not warm and barely illuminate, the men whisper about Stalingrad. They speak the name the way one speaks of a storm, something vast, something inevitable, something coming. They hear rumors. The Soviets are digging in. The factories are turning out weapons by the hour. Civilians are taking up arms. The city is preparing to fight house by house, room by room. No one knows if the rumors are true. No one wants to find out. The officers push them onward, but even they cannot hide the tension in their voices. The maps on their desks tremble from the vibrations of distant artillery. Radios crackle with reports of fierce resistance along the Don. Tanks roll by, coated in dust so thick their insignias disappear. Supply trucks arrive half empty. Ammunition boxes grow lighter. The land feels tighter, narrower, hotter. One evening, the sky burns, orange, as the sun sinks behind the steppe. Soldiers watch it dip low, turning the clouds to streaks of blood across the horizon. The air hums with insects. The wind stirs the dry grass in restless ripples. And far, far away, barely audible under the weight of the summer heat, they hear it, the distant thunder of Stalingrad's defences. Artillery, explosions, war waking. The black summer deepens. The Volga draws them closer. And the men begin to understand that everything they endured before the frost, the blizzards, the hunger, the endless white, was only a prelude. The true nightmare waits in the ruins ahead. Stalingrad appears not as a city, but as a mirage wavering in the heat, flickering beneath the pale haze that drifts over the steppe like a dying breath. The closer the soldiers march, the more unreal it becomes. Smoke coils upward from distant chimneys. Chimneys without roofs, roofs without walls, walls without homes. It is a place suspended between life and ruin, held together only by the stubborn will of those who refuse to abandon it. The first thing they notice is the dust. It does not rise from the ground, it falls from the sky. Ash drifts in slow spirals from invisible fires, burning somewhere in the city's battered heart. It collects on helmets and shoulders, on rifle barrels and eyelashes. It coats boots in a thin, grey film. Even the air tastes of dust dry, bitter, metallic. Soldiers cough as they breathe it in, wiping their lips with cracked hands. Their tongues feel swollen, their throats sting. Then come the echoes. Not sounds, but impressions of sounds. Distant, hammering that might be gunfire, or might be a factory still working in defiance of the siege. Stray voices carried on the wind, men shouting orders, or perhaps families calling to one another from shattered courtyards. Footsteps that seem to come from every direction. Doors slamming in abandoned buildings. The city murmurs to itself, restless, never still. The Germans advance cautiously. Every alley feels like a throat. Every window, an unblinking eye. Every shadow, a hand reaching for them. Stalingrad is not empty. It is watching. As the men enter the outskirts, they see the full damage inflicted by weeks of bombing. Whole districts lie in ruins, hills of brick and twisted metal rising where apartment blocks once stood. Telegraph poles lean drunkenly across cratered streets. Trolleys lie overturned, their wheels half buried in rubble. The burned-out shells of factories stretch across the skyline like broken ribs jutting from a dead giant. And yet life persists. Children dart between collapsed stairwells, thin as ghosts, their cheeks hollow but their eyes alert. Women carry buckets through streets cratered by bombs, picking paths with the instinct of those who have learned the rhythm of danger. Elderly men sit on half-destroyed stoops, watching the approaching soldiers with expressions carved from stone. They do not run. They do not speak. They simply endure. The German soldiers exchange uneasy glances. It is not fear they feel, at least not yet, but a sense of trespassing, of stepping into a place that has learned how to suffer and survived every lesson. Inside the city centre, the Soviets wait, not in open lines, not behind clear defences, but inside the bones of Stalingrad itself. A machine gun fires from the window of a collapsed school. A sniper peers through a hole in a water tower. Grenadiers hide beneath staircases, behind broken fountains, inside the husks of streetcars. The Germans return fire, but the city absorbs the sound, bending it, twisting it, sending it echoing down streets in strange ricochets. It becomes impossible to tell where shots originate. Bullets whistle from impossible angles. Men fall without seeing who killed them. Stalingrad fights like a labyrinth. The Soviet soldiers navigate it with the ease of those who know its cracks intimately. They slip through narrow gaps between fallen beams. They crawl through sewer grates. They use storm drains as hallways. Their footsteps sound like whispers beneath the rubble. They vanish and reappear at will. To the Germans, it feels as if the city itself is birthing more defenders. One platoon enters an abandoned factory. Only 2 men walk out. They tremble. They do not speak. The dust thickens as artillery shakes the ground. Each explosion sends new clouds of brick powder rolling through the streets. Vision shrinks to a few meters. Men wander in half-blind circles. Shadows loom suddenly, then dissolve again into haze. The Soviets take advantage. They strike. From corners where the dust swirls thickest. They fire from behind pillars that crumble after each shot. They refuse to yield even an inch. The Germans begin to realize what this city truly is. A graveyard waiting to be filled. A riddle that can only be answered with blood. A battlefield designed not by generals, but by ruin. Stalingrad does not roar. It whispers. It breathes. It consumes. Step by step, the invaders move deeper into the maze of dust, and echoes each man carrying both his rifle and the growing understanding that the city is not passive. Stalingrad will fight them, street by street, brick by brick, shadow by shadow, and it will not let go easily. By the time the Germans push deeper into Stalingrad, the city has already transformed into something inhuman, an immense, fractured body with arteries of shattered streets, lungs of smoke-filled courtyards, and bones of broken factories jutting upward like ruined spires. But its true heart lies underground, beneath the rubble, beneath the dust, where the air grows damp and the darkness grows thick. The Soviets live there, and they wait. The first German squads learn this the hard way. They enter a narrow street filled with the remains of collapsed apartments, walls leaning into each other like drunks, windows shattered into cruel teeth. Smoke rises from a crater at the far end, drifting slowly through the ruins like a ghost searching for a lost home. The men move carefully, rifles raised, boots crunching over debris. Then a man disappears. One moment he is there, walking, breathing, scanning corners. The next, the floor beneath him trembles, and a pair of hands drag him downward, into darkness. His scream echoes into the broken foundations. His comrades rush forward, but only dust and shattered bricks remain where he stood. The street exhales softly, as though nothing happened at all. The sewers have consumed him. Beneath Stalingrad runs a labyrinth of tunnels, old water lines, drainage systems, basements connected by holes torn through walls, pipes large enough to crawl through. The Soviets navigate these channels like veins under the skin. They emerge behind German lines, attack from below, vanish before retaliation lands. Every drain cover becomes a doorway. Every cracked tile, an ambush point. Sometimes, the Germans hear whispers from the dark. Not words, just breath, just movement, just the faint scrape of boots in tunnels too small to stand in. They drop grenades into the grates. Sometimes they hear screams, sometimes they hear nothing at all. Above ground, another enemy rules the rooftops. Snipers. They perch inside the jagged remains of factories, within the rafters of ruined rail stations, behind the iron skeletons of buildings bombed so thoroughly that only their frames remain. They wait for hours in positions colder than steel, their rifles steady, their breath controlled. When the moment comes, they fire once, just once. A German soldier drops. The sniper changes position. Silence returns. The Germans call them ghosts. The Soviets call them hunters. Stalingrad calls them necessary. One morning, a sniper hits 3 officers in less than 4 minutes. Their bodies lie sprawled on the stairwell of a collapsed apartment block. The soldiers below freeze, unable to determine where the shots came from. Snipers work alone or in pairs. Some lie beneath heaps of rubble, firing through cracks so small that light barely enters. Others use child-sized crawl spaces to slip between buildings without ever touching the street. The city becomes a vast, silent shooting gallery. Shadows shift on upper floors. Rifles flash for a fraction of a second. Men fall with their helmets tipped back, eyes staring at a sky they will never understand. And always, always there is smoke. It pours from burning oil tanks along the riverbank, drifting in black columns that twist in the wind. It rises from the chimneys of shattered homes, where survivors cook the last of their grain. It leaks from the rubble of struck factories, thick as fog, crawling between bricks, seeping into alleys until the world shrinks to a close, suffocating haze. The smoke hides movement. The smoke hides danger. The smoke hides death. But it also suffocates the living. German soldiers cough as they push forward, their throats raw, their eyes watering. They stumble blindly around corners, hands outstretched, rifles pointing at nothing. Sometimes the smoke thins just enough to reveal silhouettes, figures kneeling behind broken walls, figures darting across ruined boulevards. Sometimes those silhouettes vanish before the smoke closes again. One squad swears they saw a woman carrying a rifle through the haze, her hair tied back, her coat too large, her footsteps silent. When they fire, she is already gone. Later, her shot finds one of them from a window 5 floors up. The city breathes violence. Every sewer entrance becomes a threat. Every rooftop, a weapon. Every cloud of smoke, a mask. By nightfall, the Germans are drained, eyes stinging, lungs burning, hands trembling from the strain of battling shadows instead of soldiers. They collapse inside half-destroyed rooms, boots still on, rifles across their chests. Sleep does not come, only exhaustion. Outside, the city shifts again. Ice forms in black puddles. Smoke settles into the rubble like a blanket. The sewers whisper. The snipers watch. Stalingrad does not rest. Neither does death. Because in this city of dust and echoes, every corner is a battlefield, every shadow a soldier, and every breath an invitation for the war to continue. The cold returns in late November, not with the sharp violence of a blizzard, but with a slow, tightening grip, like a hand closing around a throat. The snow falls softly at first, settling into the cracks of Stalingrad's ruins, frosting the shattered bricks, clinging to the twisted metal skeletons of factories. It covers corpses left in the open, smoothing their shapes until they look like mounds of forgotten earth. But beneath that soft surface, something darker moves, something deliberate, something inevitable. The encirclement begins quietly. Soviet forces stretch their wings north and south of Stalingrad, massive formations moving through fog and frost, their engines muted by the snow. The German soldiers inside the city do not see them at first. They only hear rumors carried between shattered departments of the front, Soviet armor advancing along the Don, rifle divisions cutting off roads once thought secure, horse-mounted cavalry slipping through ravines and frozen woods. The Germans shrug it off at first. Rumors, they think, smoke and shadows. But the shadows grow, and the smoke thickens. One morning, a patrol sent west from the city fails to return. Another disappears the following day. A third runs back breathless, frost clinging to their beards, shouting that they found Soviet tanks where German supply lines should have been black silhouettes moving through the dawn, their cannons pointed eastward. Stalingrad is becoming an island. Inside the city, the men feel the shift first, not through orders, but through absence. Fewer supply trucks rumble through the outskirts. Fewer shells arrive at the front. The bread grows harder, thinner, stretched with sawdust. The wounded stop being evacuated. The dead stop being counted. Something has changed. Something enormous. Then the radios crackle with static, followed by voices that shake like the ground beneath artillery. Soviet forces have cut through the Romanian lines north of the city. Thousands flee. Thousands more freeze. German officers gather around maps and watch the red arrows converge. A vice tightening, a mouth closing. Operation Uranus is not a rumor, it is reality. By the third day, the ring has formed. Men on the northern edge of Stalingrad look out over the frozen steppe and see lines of Soviet forces stretching like a red horizon. They watch the silhouettes of T-34 advance through the snow, engines humming like distant beasts. They fire at them. The bullets spark uselessly off the armor. The tanks keep moving. The ring contracts. Inside Stalingrad, the streets feel different. The smoke rising from cattle cars no longer signals new supplies, only the last of the old ones burning. The air tastes of metal and desperation. Soldiers stand in the ruins with rifles slung low, staring westward as if expecting salvation to walk in on foot. No salvation comes. The German Sixth Army receives its orders. Hold the city. Wait for relief. Do not retreat. But relief is a promise made from far away, from warm rooms where people do not freeze in their coats, from tables where food still exists, from men who will never walk Stalingrad's broken streets themselves. The soldiers know the truth before their commanders speak it. They are trapped. Yet the war inside the city goes on. The Soviets, buoyed by the encirclement, push harder through the ruins. They advance street by street, using the winter like a shield. Machine gun fire crackles from the basements. Mortars thump from behind walls that lean like drunks. Tanks roll cautiously through rubble-filled boulevards, their tracks crushing bricks and bones alike. German soldiers move from room to room like ghosts, their footsteps muffled by snow and dust. Some hold positions inside buildings that shake from the force of nearby shelling. Others crouch in the corners of ruined factories where oil still pools on the concrete like black mirrors. Food becomes memory. Ammunition becomes treasure. Hope becomes a fragile ember. The encirclement closes further, not just physically, but psychologically. A tightening noose around the mind. The sky feels lower. The wind feels colder. The walls seem to fold inward. One night, on the western edge of the city, a soldier climbs a pile of rubble to see if any relief columns are coming. The horizon is empty. Snow drifts gently down. The wind sighs. The steppe stretches to infinity, white, silent, indifferent. He stands there until his fingers go numb, until his breath becomes fog, until he understands no one is coming. The Soviets tighten the circle another few kilometers the next day, and another the day after. Stalingrad becomes a bowl of snow and flame, with no roads out and no air left to breathe. The encirclement is not an event. It is a slow drowning, a long, quiet death. The city caught in winter's fist, the army trapped in a grave that has not yet closed. And deep inside Stalingrad, the men feel it, the weight of a world shrinking. Around them, the horizon collapsing, the end approaching in soft, inevitable steps. It begins quietly, almost politely, the way the cold first crept in months before, soft, familiar, easily dismissed. The rations shrink a little each day. Bread slices grow thinner. Soup grows clearer. Meat becomes a memory spoken aloud, like a bedtime story. At first, the men joke about it. They laugh over the pitiful portions. They brag that they've survived worse. They say hunger is nothing compared to bullets. But hunger is patient. Hunger waits. Hunger listens. Soon the jokes fade, and the silence begins. Within the encircled ruins of Stalingrad, the Sixth Army gnaws through the last of its supplies. The supply drops, those rare, desperate payloads parachuted in by night, scatter across the snow like false hope. Some land behind Soviet lines, others shatter upon impact. A lucky few are retrieved by starving men who tear into the crates with bare hands, swallowing handfuls of flour, chewing frozen strips of horse meat still coated with frost. The officers enforce rations. A few ounces of bread, a tin of thin soup, a handful of dried vegetables. But the men's bodies rebel against such meagre offerings. Their cheeks sink in, their uniforms hang loose, their belts tighten another notch, then another. Their bones press against their skin like they're trying to escape. Their breath becomes shallow, weak, tinged with the sour smell of starvation. Hunger changes everything. It makes men slow. It makes men careless. It makes men cruel. In the bombed-out factories, soldiers stand guard, not over ammunition, but over bread. In shattered apartments, units argue over a single tin of meat. Fistfights break out in the dark fights that would once have required insults or pride. Now they require only hunger. The Soviets see the change too. Their patrols report weakened enemy movements, slower reactions, hollow faces emerging from ruined windows. They know hunger is doing their work for them. Inside the city, the cold worsens hunger's cruelty. Frost forms inside the men's coats. Snow drifts into their boots. Their hands go numb, not from the weather, but from lack of strength. Digging a trench feels like climbing a mountain. Holding a rifle feels like lifting a boulder. Hunger lives inside their bodies now. It gnaws, it whispers, it tightens its grip inch by inch. Some soldiers boil leather straps to soften them, chewing for hours until their jaws ache. Others scrape burned flour from the bottoms of abandoned pans. A few find frozen dogs or pieces of them and cook what remains over small, flickering fires. The officers turn a blind eye. They understand. Survival at Stalingrad has become an animal thing. The bodies appear quietly at first. A man who lay down to rest in a corner and never rose. A guard found slumped against a wall, rifle across his lap, eyes open but empty. Men who collapse mid-step, limbs folding like brittle twigs. The medics do what they can. They cannot do much. Hunger seeps into the mind as well. Men forget where they placed their rifles. They forget orders. They forget the day of the week. Once, a soldier forgets his own name for several hours and must be reminded. Some begin seeing things in the corners of their vision, family members waving from across the room, tables filled with food, warm firelit kitchens from childhood winters. Others hear voices calling to them through the walls, whispering promises of rest, comfort, escape. The worst of them wander into the snow in the middle of the night, drawn by hallucinations of warmth or home. In the morning, their bodies are found curled under thin blankets of frost, faces still softened by whatever dream lured them into the cold. Hunger also creates silence, a heavy silence that blankets the ruins more completely than the snow. Men conserve their breath. They conserve their words. Speech becomes a luxury. Conversation becomes a memory. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, the only sound is the faint rumble of distant Soviet artillery or the soft moans of starving soldiers sleeping with empty stomachs, dreaming of bread. Even their enemy begins to pity them. Soviet soldiers occasionally find frozen bodies in the ruins, German soldiers clutching empty canteens or small bags of crumbs. They cover the corpses with pieces of cloth torn from old uniforms. The war does not stop for grief, but grief moves quietly through both sides. Hunger does not stop. Hunger does not tire. Hunger does not forgive. The city is dying. The army is dying. And somewhere deep inside each gaunt, exhausted soldier, a voice begins to whisper a truth they have tried to ignore. The winter might not kill them. The Soviets might not kill them. But hunger will hollow them out until nothing remains but frost and bones. Stalingrad has become a stomach with no food, and the men trapped within it are slowly being devoured. By January, the city has stopped fighting loudly. The roar of artillery still shakes the ruins at times, and the crack of rifles still echoes through shattered boulevards, but the old thunder of battle has dulled into something slower, heavier, quieter. The frost has become the loudest commander. The cold, the hunger, the exhaustion, they speak in deeper tones than generals ever could. Stalingrad is no longer a battlefield. It is a grave waiting to be filled. The men of the Sixth Army move through the ruins like shadows. Their uniforms hang off their bodies like wet rags. Their cheeks are sunken. Their hands tremble with every motion. They no longer run when shells fall nearby. They no longer dive for cover. They simply stop, blink slowly, and continue walking in the same direction toward nowhere, toward nothing. Frost has claimed their thoughts. Hunger has claimed their hearts. Silence has claimed their courage. By now, ammunition is scarce. Fuel is gone. Medicine is a rumor. Food exists only in memory. Some men tear pages from books found in abandoned apartments, not to read them but to boil them ink and paper, becoming a thin broth that tastes of nothing but desperation. The Soviets tighten the ring around the city. They advance street by street with grim precision, not out of confidence, but out of respect for the starving, cornered enemy. When they fight carefully. When they pause, they listen for movements in the ruins, movements that grow fewer each day. Prisoners begin to surrender in small groups. 5 men here, 7 there, sometimes a dozen. They emerge with their hands raised slowly, fingers stiffened by the cold, rifles slung across their shoulders, not as weapons but as burdens they can no longer carry. Their voices crack when they speak. Some cannot speak at all. Others collapse before they reach Soviet lines, lips moving soundlessly, eyes glazed with a mix of relief and shame. The Soviet soldiers watch them with a strange mixture of caution and sorrow. They offer water. They offer a crust of bread, a blanket. Not kindness, just humanity, the last currency left on this frozen front. But the bulk of the Sixth Army still waits inside the ruins. They wait for orders. They wait for rescue. They wait for death. General Paulus receives the directive from Hitler: no surrender. Hold Stalingrad to the last man. The men hear the order with blank expressions. Some nod slowly, as if sleepwalking. Others look at their boots. A few laugh, a soft, broken sound carried away instantly by the cold wind. They know the truth. There will be no rescue. There will be no breakout. There will be no salvation. The cold is too deep. The Soviets too close. The city too dead. Still, they follow orders. They take positions in ruined houses, where windows are filled with snowdrifts. They man machine guns with frozen bolts. They guard intersections where no one will ever pass again. Their rifles are so cold the metal burns, their fingers through their gloves. Their breath fogs the air in weak, thin wisps. On January 31st, dawn rises pale and colourless over the Volga. Snowflakes drift downward like ash settling after a fire. The ruins glow faintly in the weak morning light. In a basement beneath a shattered department store, Paulus sits wrapped in a blanket, his hands trembling over a map he can no longer read. Outside, Soviet officers approach. They carry no rifles, only a white flag. Inside the building, the German soldiers rise slowly. Their joints crack, their bones ache. They glance at one another as though waking from a long nightmare. Some shrug, some stare at the ground, some cry silently, tears freezing on their cheeks before they reach their chins. Paulus steps forward. The Soviet officers speak respectfully, quietly. No shouting, no triumph, just the formality of ending something terrible. Paulus nods, and in that nod, the Sixth Army dies. No drum roll, no final charge, no heroic last stand. Just a frozen surrender in a frozen city. Word spreads slowly through the ruins. A few hours later, entire battalions emerge from cellars and trenches, hands raised weakly, boots dragging through the snow. Their rifles hang limp, their helmets sit crooked. Many of them carry blankets instead of weapons. Some carry nothing at all. The Soviets watch them pass, long columns of the defeated shuffling toward captivity. They do not cheer. They do not jeer. They simply escort them through the blowing snow, faces set with the grim understanding that war has taken more from these men than any army ever could. The surrender feels less like victory than exhaustion. Stalingrad exhales at last, a long, slow breath escaping a city that has suffered too much, endured too much, burned too much, frozen too much. And as the last German soldiers disappear into the drifting snow, the ruins remain silent. The battle is over, but the cold does not care. Winter lingers. The ghosts settle. Stalingrad stands, not as triumph, not as defeat, but as the tomb where an army froze and a war changed its shape. A frozen surrender, a frozen ending, a frozen chapter in a nightmare that is far from over. Long before the snow melts and long after the great battles roar across the steppe, another war lives quietly in the forests. It moves between the trunks of ancient pines, in shadows beneath low branches heavy with frost, in the thick breath of men who do not wear uniforms or march in formation. The partisans are born from lost farmers whose villages burned, hunters whose traps were destroyed, teachers, students, carpenters, old men with stiff joints, teenagers with trembling hands. The forests take them in one by one, and winter baptizes them into a different kind of army. Their world is colder, darker, quieter than the front. The pines stand tall, crowding together in tight ranks as if they too have chosen a side. Snow lies thick on their branches, muffling every sound, softening every footprint. The wind sighs through them like a tired sentinel. Beneath that canopy, the partisans build their homes, a scattering of dugouts hidden beneath brush and snow, roofs disguised with branches, chimneys, no more than tiny cracks in the earth that release smoke so faint it disappears into the morning mist. The forest smells of pine resin, cold earth, and gun oil. At dawn, the partisans move with the hush of animals. Their boots barely disturb the snow. Their rifles old, mismatched. Some nearly antiques hang from straps patched with wire and rope. They listen constantly. Every twig that snaps, every distant engine rumble, every rustle of a bird's wing becomes a warning. Silence is both ally and enemy. They gather around maps made from memory and scraps of paper, tracing supply routes with fingers calloused from cold and labour. Their targets are not trenches or fortified cities, but lifelines, bridges, fuel depots, rail lines, telephone poles. They strike where the front does not look, where the enemy feels safest, where a single explosion can send ripples across an entire army. The Germans fear the forests. They march in columns with machine guns raised, firing into the trees at shadows that do not move. They send patrols that do not return. They burn villages suspected of sheltering fighters. They lay mines along logging roads and set traps near frozen streams. And still the partisans come back. Still they melt into the trees, leaving only footprints the snow covers within hours. One night, a partisan group ambushes a German convoy struggling along a narrow forest road. Snow falls in thick, quiet flakes that swallow every sound. The men wait in the trees, rifles steady, breath slow. The headlights appear first, a pale glow moving between the trunks. Voices follow, the creak of wooden wheels, the grumble of engines refusing to warm. A partisan raises a gloved hand. The others ready their weapons. A single shot cracks the air, sharp and cold. The lead driver slumps forward, the truck veering sideways. Chaos erupts, shouts, gunfire, bodies dropping into the snow. The partisans fire, reposition, fire again. The forest returns, each shot as a hollow echo. The Germans try to fight back, but they fire in the wrong directions, at phantoms, at whispers, at the pines themselves. Within minutes, the convoy falls silent. Flames flicker from one overturned vehicle, the smoke rising black against the falling snow. The partisans do not stay to celebrate. They gather what they need: food, ammunition, warm coats. Then they vanish into the woods before reinforcements arrive. Their victories are not marked on any map. Their names are not recorded in any register. Their graves, when they fall, are shallow and unmarked, tucked beneath roots and branches. Winter watches them with cold approval. Nights in the forest are long and unforgiving. The men huddle together for warmth, sharing blankets patched so many times they resemble quilts of survival. They chew hard bread, dried berries, strips of smoked meat when they have it, pine needles boiled into bitter tea when they do not. They whisper stories of their families, their vanished homes, their reasons for fighting. Some speak with fire in their voices. Others speak softly, as if afraid the forest will swallow their words. In the quietest hours, wolves prowl near the camp. Their eyes glow faintly between the trees. Their howls drift like mournful prayers. The partisans listen, rifles ready, though they know wolves are not the real threat. Wolves come only for the dead. Men come for the living. By spring, the partisans have grown leaner, sharper, harder. Their faces are carved by cold and resolve. The forest has become their shield, their weapon, their home. The war beyond the pines shifts and rages, armies surging back and forth across the steppe. But here, in the deep, lonely woods, a quieter struggle endures. One fought in silence, in shadows, in frost. A war of ghosts among the trees. A war the enemy can never fully see and never fully kill. When the thaw finally arrives, it does not feel like salvation. It feels like the land coughing. The frost cracks open in long, groaning lines across the earth, releasing trapped water that spills into every hollow and gully. Snow melts into grey rivers that rush without direction. The air warms just enough to turn the ground soft, but not soft like spring soil, soft like rot, soft like a body left too long in the cold. The retreating soldiers discover quickly that winter's end is not mercy. It is punishment. The roads, if they can still be called that, disappear within days. Tracks cut by tanks fill with murky water. Footpaths dissolve into sucking mire that clings to boots like a living thing. Horses, already thin from months of starvation, struggle to move more than a few feet before sinking past their knees. Wagons tilt and topple. Engines stall. Wheels and gears clog with thick, sticky sludge. The mud has its own appetite. It swallows rifles dropped in haste. It devours, boots pulled from numb feet. It steals lives quietly, without witness. A soldier takes a wrong step and sinks to his thighs. He calls for help, his voice thick with fear. His comrades pull at him desperately, forming a chain of hands and arms and shouted prayers. But the mud resists. It pulls harder, greedier. Only after minutes of frantic effort do they haul him free, shaking, breathless, face streaked with tears and filth. He will not speak for the rest of the day. The retreat is a crawl, not a march. Columns stretch across the horizon, long, broken lines of exhausted men, moving through a landscape that has turned to liquid. They slump beneath the weight of their packs. They slip and fall, their hands sinking wrist-deep into freezing muck. They move like men trapped in a nightmare, where every step becomes a negotiation with the earth itself. Behind them, the Soviets advance not quickly, but steadily, confidently, inevitably. They do not need to rush. The mud slows everyone, but it slows the retreating army more. German soldiers, worn thin by winter and hunger, lack the strength to push through. Their boots grow heavier with each step, caked in layers of sludge that cling like chains. Their coats smell of damp wool and fear. Their rifles rust in their hands. Sometimes they hear engines behind them, Soviet tanks grinding forward, their tracks wide and formidable, built for this land. The sound carries through the fog and drizzle like the growl of something ancient and hungry. The Germans panic. They stumble faster, but the mud accepts no haste. It holds them down, demanding its price. When a tank appears on the horizon, it is always the same image. A dark, hulking silhouette, moving slowly but relentlessly through the mire, as if the land itself is pushing it forward. The soldiers glance back at it with hollow eyes, knowing they cannot outrun it, knowing they cannot fight it, knowing only that they must keep moving or be consumed by the machine, the mud, or both. Villages offer no refuge. What remains of them are mired structures leaning at odd angles. Roofs collapsed under melting snow. Wells are contaminated. Hearths are cold. Chickens, if any survived, are coated in mud and too sickly to catch. Some houses still smoulder, the smoke rising faintly into the damp air like ghosts trying to escape. The retreating units move through these broken settlements without stopping. Stopping means sinking. Stopping means being overtaken. Stopping means death. The mud makes everything heavy. Uniforms, backpacks, voices, thoughts. Even the sky seems weighed down, hanging low and colourless. Mist clings to the men like wet cloth. The air smells of rotting earth and wet metal. Rain falls not in drops but in sheets, steady, cold, numbing. In this endless, sucking world, even sound becomes thick. Gunshots are muffled. Shouts die in the fog. Footsteps vanish completely. At night, the men collapse wherever they can, on raised patches of ground, on bits of broken board, on stones protruding from the mire. They sleep sitting up to keep their bodies from sinking. Some sleep while still standing, their heads bowed, their rifles resting against their chests. Some do not wake. When morning comes, the Soviets are always closer. Their artillery booms across the misty fields. Their scouts move with greater speed, greater confidence. They know the land, they trust the mud, they use it. The retreat grows more frantic. Officers shout orders that no one hears. Men abandon equipment too heavy to carry. Trucks are left half submerged. Horses are cut loose. Carts are burned. The retreat becomes a shedding of weight, of tools, of dignity. A man slips again, sinking to his waist. His comrades look back, but only for a moment. They hesitate. They do not have the strength. They turn away. The mud swallows him in silence. By dusk, The entire retreating force resembles ghosts crawling across a swamp of earth and regret. The mud stretches ahead of them for miles. It stretches behind them even further. The present, past, and future merge into one endless, suffocating struggle. The land has reclaimed its dominance. Winter froze them. Summer burned them. Now, spring drowns them. The retreat becomes a march through the earth's own wrath, slow, merciless, inescapable, and the mud, ancient and patient, continues to pull at their heels with every step, as if reminding the retreating army that nature, not strategy, decides who survives the Eastern Front. The snow begins again as the trains gather. Large, heavy flakes drift silently beneath the station lamps, glowing briefly before melting on the metal roofs of the cars. The platforms are dim, lit by scattered bulbs that flicker in the freezing wind. Everything is grey, the sky, the steam, the breath of the guards, the eyes of the prisoners. The night trains do not whistle, they groan. Wooden boxcars stretch along the rails in a line that seems to run into eternity. Their sides frostbitten, their doors bolted shut with iron bars. The engines exhale clouds of steam that rise like ghosts fleeing into the darkness. The men soldiers captured after Stalingrad, civilians accused of collaboration, wanderers caught in the wrong town on the wrong day, stand in groups beneath the dim lights, shivering in threadbare coats. They clutch blankets too thin to matter. Some hold on to photographs sealed in pockets close to their hearts. Others carry nothing at all. A Soviet officer reads names from a clipboard, his voice steady and detached. The men step forward one by one. There is no shouting, no cruelty, no comfort, just the quiet inevitability of a winter night swallowing them whole. The prisoners climb into the boxcars with stiff limbs and vacant stares. The floors are covered with a thin layer of straw, already damp from snow tracked in by earlier groups. The walls smell of old wood, cold iron, sweat, and hopelessness. Each car fills slowly 20 men, 30, 50, until there is barely enough space to sit. The guards slide the iron doors closed with heavy clanks. The sound echoes along the line of cars like a final verdict. Inside, darkness thickens. Breaths mingle in the stale air. Someone begins to cough. When the train jolts forward, it feels less like movement and more like being swallowed by the night. The wheels scrape against the frozen rails, sending vibrations through the wooden walls. The prisoners sway like a single, exhausted body. Snow falls, heavier now, striking the roof in soft, steady taps. The world outside blurs stations, forests, empty fields passing without witness or meaning. Hours pass, or minutes. Time loses shape in the darkness. A sliver of moonlight seeps through a crack in the boards, illuminating frost forming on the inside of the car. The men breathe into their hands, rubbing their fingers desperately, whispering to themselves or to no one at all. Some pray, some curse, some sit with eyes closed, seeing memories instead of the world around them. The train continues its steady, merciless rhythm. Clack, clack, clack. Through the night, the cold worsens. It creeps into boots, stiffens joints, numbs faces, until expressions freeze into masks. A man collapses in the corner, sliding down the wall like a sack of grain. The prisoners lift him, prop him upright, try to warm him, but his breaths grow slower, his head bows. When the train lurches again, he does not move. By morning, frost has settled on his eyelashes. Someone drapes a coat over him. There is no room to lay him down. The train stops at scattered stations, small clusters of wooden buildings buried in snow. Guards with fur-lined hats open the doors, letting in a gust of brutal wind that bites into the prisoners' faces like knives. Some men are ordered out, others are pushed in to replace them. Children watch from a distance, wrapped in scarves, their eyes wide with confusion or fear. One station smells of burning coal and cabbage soup. None of the prisoners taste either. The journey grows longer. The tracks wind north, deeper and deeper into forests where the trees stand like dark pillars in endless rows. Ravens gather along the telegraph wires, their black shapes stark against the white expanse. Wolves trot parallel to the tracks at times, drawn by the scent of sickness and despair drifting from the cars. Inside, the prisoners begin to whisper the same word: Siberia, a land of ice, of camps, of labor that breaks backs and hope. They know stories everyone does. They know men vanish there. They know men return changed, if they return at all. Yet the train presses on. Nights blend together into one long, frozen dream. Days pass with no warmth. Voices fade. Hope thins. Sometimes, in the deepest hours, the engine's whistle does blow, long, low, mournful. The sound echoes across the frozen plains like a lament, a cry for the nameless thousands it carries toward the end of their old lives. The men listen to it with hollow eyes. It is the only thing that sounds alive in the night. When the train finally slows for the last time, dawn barely warms the horizon. A wooden archway awaits, its lettering half buried beneath frost. Guards line the path ahead. Smoke drifts from distant chimneys. The doors slide open. Cold rushes in. The prisoners step out. Snow crunches beneath their boots. Breath clouds the air. Some men whisper prayers. Most remain silent. The night trains to Siberia have delivered another cargo of the defeated, the broken, and the forgotten. And the frozen land watches them arrive, not with malice, but with the indifferent patience of a world that has seen too many winters and too many trains. Winter returns like a slow, deliberate confession, not with blizzards, not with roaring winds, but with a quiet thickening of the air, an icy stillness that settles over the land like a shroud. The first flakes drift down softly, landing on roofs, on frozen rivers, on the empty helmets that still lie scattered across abandoned trenches. They fall without ceremony, without haste, covering the world in a pale, deceptive purity. But beneath that fragile white blanket, something else waits, something older, something unavoidable: bones. They begin to appear when the frost shifts, when the snow melts just enough to expose the earth's wounds. A femur jutting from a ditch, a ribcage half buried in the mud, a skull resting in a crater, its empty sockets filled with ice. Some bones lie alone, others are entwined with the rusted remains of rifles or helmets or torn cloth. They emerge like secrets forced into the open by the changing season. The soldiers who retreat through these fields avert their eyes at first. Then they stop looking away. There are too many to avoid. The bones do not belong to one army. Some wear German boots, some wear Soviet coats, some wear nothing at all, stripped by frost, animals, or fellow soldiers in need. They form a grim chorus in the fields, skeletal reminders of battles fought months before, of attacks launched in blinding snowstorms, of retreats through forests where visibility vanished with the daylight, of the wounded who collapsed on frostbitten roads and never rose. The land remembers everything. The men remember only what they can bear. One Soviet unit, marching after a long night of patrol, stops when they reach a wide clearing. Snowfall has paused. Mist hangs low. As the sun rises, it paints the frost-covered earth in pale gold. And in that light, the bones gleam, hundreds of them, spread across the field like a map of ruin. A soldier whispers, "This was a regiment." Another corrects him softly, "No, two." They do not speak again. The forest bordering the clearing holds its own memories. Trees stand tall but scarred, bark stripped by shrapnel, trunks splintered by artillery. Beneath the pines lie shallow depressions filled with snow, graves dug too quickly, too desperately, too coldly. Sometimes the wolves find them, sometimes the spring does. In another stretch of the front, German soldiers repairing a road strike something hard in the frozen mud. At first they think it is a rock, then the rock has teeth. They dig deeper, carefully, silently, and uncover an entire line of bodies buried hastily beneath a collapsed trench. The uniforms are faded, the faces gone, but the hands, curled and frozen in their final gestures, remain unmistakably human. A chaplain murmurs a prayer. A private crosses himself. An officer orders them to keep digging, the road must be repaired. War leaves no room for tenderness. Farther east, a thaw after a brief warm spell, reveals something stranger, a frozen lake that holds dozens of bodies preserved in ice, some trapped mid-motion, arms outstretched, fingers reaching toward the surface. Their outlines shimmer beneath the translucent surface, as if they are still alive, still struggling, still breathing, just beneath the weight of winter. The locals call them the drowned ghosts. The soldiers call them warnings. Even the trenches are not spared. As snow melts inside the deep, narrow channels, water pools at the bottom, revealing shapes beneath rifles, helmets, packs, bones. A hand, pale and stiff, emerges from the mud like a last plea. A boot containing a foot still laced into place, a jawbone resting against the wooden supports. No one claims these remains. No one marks them. No one has the time. War does not allow for mourning, but winter forces remembrance. At night, around small campfires burning damp wood, soldiers speak in low voices about the bones. Not with fear. Exactly, fear belongs to the living, but with a strange, heavy respect. The dead become part of the landscape, part of the front, part of the story none of them want to tell, but all of them are trapped inside. One man says he dreamed the bones rose from the snow and walked silently across the steppe, searching for something they had lost. Another swears he saw a skull staring at him from beneath the ice, its empty eyes following his movements. A third says nothing, but stares into the fire with a haunted stillness. In the quietest hours, when the wind dies and the snowfall pauses, the land feels too still, too watchful. The soldiers begin to believe that the bones beneath the snow are listening to the footsteps of the living, listening to the distant growl of tanks, listening to the rumble of the next bombardment, because they know what is coming next. They have felt the tremors in the ground. They have seen the massing troops on the horizon. The bones beneath the snow are not warnings of the past. They are predictions of the future. The next chapter of this war will feed the earth again, and the snow, quiet, patient, merciful, will cover everything once more. The calendar insists it is spring. The air does not. The land does not. The men do not believe it. The Eastern Front waits under a sky the colour of dirty metal, where the sun rises weakly each morning as though reluctant to return. Snow still clings to the corners of ruined barns, blackened bunkers, and abandoned trucks half buried in frozen earth. The rivers remain locked under thick sheaths of ice that groan when stepped upon. The trees are skeletal things, grey, brittle, stripped bare by months of cold that refuse to end. It is April, but nothing grows, nothing warms, nothing feels alive. The soldiers mutter that the season has been stolen. They say winter has lodged itself in the bones of the earth, refusing to let go, refusing to release its grip. Some blame the war itself, whispering that the land has chosen sides or chosen none, and now punishes everyone equally. The ground is a mixture of thaw and frost, mud and ice interlocked in a miserable truce. Boots sink into the slush only to strike a frozen layer beneath, sending shocks up tired legs. Horses slip on patches of buried ice. Tanks plough forward, grinding wet earth into thick furrows that quickly freeze behind them. Nothing is stable. Nothing is predictable. German divisions, ragged and under strength, move westward in long, uneven columns. Their coats are threadbare. Their gloves have holes. Their faces look older than their years. They march not with urgency, but with resignation, the slow walk of men who do not trust the thaw, who expect winter to snap its jaws shut again at any moment. The Soviets follow at a careful distance, not because they cannot catch up, but because they do not need to. They wait for the land to weaken the retreat even further. They wait for the mud to return, for the wind to shift, for the earth to betray its exhausted travellers. Patrols probe forward, then fall back, watching, studying, listening to the ground, as though the soil itself carries intelligence. The front line, once a jagged line of trenches and fire, dissolves into a drifting haze of ruined fields and shattered woodlands. Every hill looks the same. Every village looks abandoned. Every road is a mixture of frostbitten ruts and ankle-deep sludge. Nothing signals spring's arrival except the smell. Not flowers, not thawing grass, but something sourer. Rot. When the snow recedes in patches, it reveals what winter hid corpses stiffened by cold, now softening in the pale light. Horses collapsed beside broken wagons, soldiers from both sides, faces sunken, uniforms fused to their bodies by ice and decay. The stench spread slowly at first, then strongly, carried on the wind like a warning. The soldiers breathe through scarves. They eat quickly, if they can eat at all. They look away. They keep moving. The earth feels haunted. At night, fog rolls in, thick, milky, swallowing fires and sentries alike. It drifts between tree trunks and over trenches collapsed by thawing soil. The men lie awake, listening to distant drips of melting ice, the groan of shifting river ice, the crack of branches breaking under their own weight. Some swear the fog carries voices, soft, familiar, unwelcome. A corporal dreams of his brother calling him from across the river. He wakes soaked in sweat despite the cold, his breath trembling, his rifle clutched tight. Another soldier hears footsteps circling the camp, only to discover the tracks belong to no one living. The ground is too soft, too muddy, too uncertain. Shapes blur into each other. Prints fill with water before they can be read. Sleep offers no warmth, no comfort, only more cold. One morning, the frost arrives again. Not enough to be winter, just enough to remind the men that the season has not truly left. Their blankets grow stiff. The water in their canteens forms thin layers of ice. The horses snort steam into the pale dawn. The officers curse beneath their breath, realizing that the promise of spring was a lie. Later that day, a brief sunbeam breaks through the cloud cover, illuminating a field of churned earth. The soldiers stop and stare, not at the sunlight, but at what it reveals. Hundreds of small green shoots pushing through the mud. Grass. Finally, grass. But the moment is ruined when the wind shifts. The smell returns. Rot, decay, war. The shoots tremble in the breeze, fragile, uncertain, trying to claim a place in a world that no longer belongs to life. And the men understand. Spring is not coming. Not truly. Not while the earth is still choking on the remnants of battles fought, bodies lost, homes burned, forests shattered. The land needs time. The war does not give it. And so the season remains trapped, caught between thaw and frost, life and death, hope and exhaustion. A spring that never quite arrives. A winter that never truly ends. A front where even the seasons have learned how to suffer. By late summer, the earth should be golden. The fields should sway under warm winds. Children should be chasing insects between tall stalks of rye. Families should be gathering the year's first vegetables from dark, fertile soil. But this is the Eastern Front, and the land has forgotten how to feed people. When the sun rises now, it spills its light over a patchwork of scars. Fields not planted but cratered. Farmhouses not bustling but burned. Orchards not blooming but stripped bare by artillery and hunger. Every grain of soil has been turned, churned, shattered by tank treads and bombs, until the land resembles an enormous graveyard of dirt and ash. The harvest begins not with scythes, but with silence, a thick, heavy silence that settles over the front like dust. Villagers who once lived from the earth emerge from makeshift shelters, cellars, half-ruined barns, dugouts hidden beneath collapsed roofs. Their eyes are hollow. Their clothes hang loose around their frames. They carry sacks patched too many times to count. They move with the slow, listless steps of people who know that whatever they find will not be enough. They walk into fields that no longer belong to them. German soldiers wander among the villagers. Soviet soldiers do too, in other places. Enemy lines shift so often that the harvesters do not know whose land they are standing in, only that it must feed them, somehow, even if the war tries to forbid it. The wheat fields are gone, replaced by tangled masses of broken stalks flattened by tank tracks. Barley fields lie charred in wide black arcs. Potatoes rot under disturbed soil where shell fragments lie buried like jagged seeds. Fruit trees lean crookedly, their bark cracked from shrapnel, their branches bare. Everything smells of smoke, and old metal, and death. Still, the people search. They dig into the earth, with hands stiff from malnutrition. They sift through ash, as if sifting through memory. A woman finds a handful of burnt grain, brushes it off, and slips it into her sack with trembling fingers. A boy pries open a ruined root cellar and discovers a few shriveled carrots clinging to life in the dirt. A farmer, once proud and broad-shouldered, now leans on a broken rake and whispers to the soil as though apologizing for surviving another year. Soldiers harvest too. German troops, retreating and starved, scour the fields for anything edible: wild berries, mushrooms, nettles. They pluck green shoots that would once have been animal fodder and chew them slowly, grimacing as bitterness fills their mouths. A squad finds a cow skeletal with hunger, her ribs visible beneath her hide, her eyes too tired to resist. They slaughter her quietly in the tall weeds, sharing the meat with hands that shake not from fear, but from longing. On the advancing side, Soviet soldiers dig trenches near abandoned farms. Some help villagers lift collapsed beams. Others steal chickens, firewood, or jars of pickled vegetables hidden beneath floorboards. War confuses morality. Hunger erases it. One afternoon, a young partisan limps into a ruined field he once ploughed with his father. He kneels in the dry earth, running his fingers through soil that now holds bullet casings instead of seeds. He digs deeper, hoping for potatoes left from last year's planting. His hands encounter something smooth, something round. He pulls it up gently, an unexploded artillery shell, stained with rust. He drops it as if burned. The earth laughs without sound. Everywhere, the land pushes back against those who try to claim life from it. Rainwater collects in bomb craters, stagnating into dark, foul-smelling pools. Insects swarm over the bodies buried shallowly beneath the soil. Rats thrive, wolves prowl, crows gather on broken telephone wires, watching with black, patient eyes. At dusk, the harvesters return to whatever shelter they call home. Their sacks are half empty. Their faces are streaked with dust, sweat, and despair. A few grains. A handful of greens. A small collection of roots. Enough to live another day, perhaps. Not enough for hope. Around small fires fed with broken furniture, scraps of roofing, splinters of old wagons, they cook what they have. The smell is faint, almost imaginary. The food is thin, barely nourishment. But in the ruined villages, meals become rituals of defiance. They eat to survive. They eat to remember. They eat to prove they still exist. On the horizon, artillery flashes paint the sky with momentary brightness. The earth shudders. The harvesters look up, chewing slowly, their expressions hardened by repetition. They know the next battle will plough the land again. They know the fields will be ruined again. They know the soil will take more than it gives. The Eastern Front's harvest is not one of grain. It is one of ruin, ruined land, ruined lives, ruined seasons. And yet, the people keep harvesting, because even in a world shattered by war, the instinct to survive remains, quiet as a seed, stubborn as a root, waiting for a spring that may never come. It begins with tracks. Small at first, barely visible impressions on the snow, shaped like delicate stars stamped onto the frozen ground. Then more appear, and more, until the road west is lined with them, weaving between abandoned wagons and collapsed telegraph poles like signatures left by something patient, hungry, and waiting. The wolves have returned, and they are not afraid anymore. The retreating columns, German soldiers trudging westward through forests, the colour of iron, notice the tracks long before they see the animals themselves. Men point with trembling fingers, whispering to one another as the wind howls between the skeletal birch trees. Stories begin to circulate. Entire patrols found torn apart. Wounded men dragged from their blankets. Wolves growing bold enough to shadow units for days. Some say hunger drove the wolves here. Others say the wolves simply learned what the war taught them. Where there is smoke, there are bodies. Where there are bodies, there is meat. The truth is simpler. The wolves have always been here. The war has only cleared a path for them. Night falls early on the winter road, swallowing the last light like a dying flame. The soldiers gather around small fires, fires that barely warm their fingers, flames that hiss and sputter from damp wood. The cold is deep enough to freeze breath in mid-air. Every shadow beyond the circle of firelight seems to move. Then, from somewhere in the forest, a howl rises. Long, low, lonely. Then another, and another. The sound threads through the trees like a needle pulling a black thread. Men stiffen. A few clutch their rifles with renewed desperation. The howl is not close, but it is not far enough. The officers try to keep order. They tell the men the wolves will not come near the fires. They tell them wolves fear noise and light. But the officers are wrong. War has taught the wolves that human fear is its own kind of invitation. Hours later, as the fires dim to embers, the first growls emerge from the darkness. Shapes move between the trees, grey bodies blending with the shadows, yellow eyes glinting in the dying light. The wolves circle slowly, their paws silent on the frozen ground. A soldier stands to throw a stick. Another tells him not to. A third mutters a prayer under his breath. The wolves watch them, studying, judging. They are not a pack of animals anymore. They are survivors, like the men. When morning comes, the wolves do not leave. They trail the column at a distance, weaving between trees, stepping over the remains of battles long since frozen solid. The soldiers can hear them breathing, sometimes hot bursts of steam against the cold morning air. One wolf walks so close to the road that a young private raises his rifle. The officer lowers it gently. "Save your bullets," he whispers. "We'll need them for men, not beasts." But by midday, the line between beast and battlefield blurs. A wounded soldier collapses in the snow, too weak to continue. His comrades try to drag him, but the mud beneath the thin snow pulls at their boots. The Soviets are pushing behind them. The wolves are waiting beside them. The world feels like a trap. Eventually, the officer makes the decision no one wants to make. The column moves on. The wounded man remains behind. He calls weakly after them. His voice fades. Then comes the silence, followed by the low, wet sound of snow shifting, followed by growls, followed by nothing. The soldiers march faster after that. At dusk, the column reaches a crossroads where the road splits between two dense forests. The wolves split too, some lingering on the right flank, others circling to the left. Their movements are coordinated, deliberate, eerily intelligent. The men whisper again. They speak of spirits, demons, punishment. They call the wolves ghost dogs, winter's soldiers, the front's final scavengers. In truth, they are just wolves, but hunger makes every creature wise. The snow begins again, drifting in slow spirals through the trees. The men push forward into the thickening white, boots crunching underfoot. The wolves follow, always just at the edge of sight, always waiting for one man to fall, for one man to lag too far behind, for the moment when exhaustion becomes death. Late that night, one of the sentries sees a wolf sitting at the edge of the camp, a large, silver-coated alpha, its fur dusted with snow, its eyes fixed on the fire. It does not snarl. It does not blink. It only watches, as if evaluating the dying flames, the dying morale, the dying men. The sentry throws a rock. The wolf does not move. It only rises, turns, and disappears silently into the dark, a ghost returning to its grave. By morning, the road is lined with fresh tracks again. The soldiers move on, weaker than the day before. The wolves follow, stronger than the night before. In a war where machines fail, where men break, where nations bleed into the soil, the wolves endure. They wait for the hungry. They wait for the wounded. They wait for the weak. They wait for winter to decide who belongs to the living and who will become part of the endless feast beneath the snow. The letters begin as small, fragile hopes, scraps of paper folded inside breast pockets, tucked beneath thin coats, carried through mud, smoke, and snow. Some are half finished. Some are stained with mud, blood, or the circles left by tin cups. Many are never sent. Many never reach the people who wait for them. By the winter of the war's turning, letters become the only warm thing the soldiers have left. Each night, in the ruins of barns, in frostbitten trenches, under shattered beams that groan in the wind, men gather around whatever light they can find, candles melted to nubs, lanterns burning fuel so thin it flickers like a dying heartbeat. They sit hunched over with gloved hands, breathing through numb fingers as they write to wives, mothers, brothers, children they have not seen in years. The ink freezes on their pens. The paper grows stiff in their hands. Still, they write, "Dear Anna, my dearest Marcia, to my little boy, Mother, please forgive me." The words struggle onto the page, uneven and desperate. The cold makes their letters small and cramped. The fear makes them softer, and the hope, the fragile hope, makes them tremble. They write of things they barely remember. Warm kitchens, summer fields, faces smiling in sunlight that feels like a dream, the sound of a child laughing, the smell of baking bread, a dog barking in a distant yard. Memories become lifelines. The officers pretend not to see the tears freezing on their men's cheeks. They pretend not to hear the soft sobs muffled behind scarves. They pretend the letters do not matter, but even the sternest among them sneaks a few words onto a scrap of paper when the others sleep. On the other side of the front, where Soviet soldiers endure their own fires, their own frost, their own hunger, letters also take shape. Their lives are no less fragile, their hopes no less brittle. They write with cold fingers and tired eyes, telling their families that they are alive, that they are strong, that they will come home when the war ends. They lie, but gently. Somewhere in the frozen night, postal trains try to run. Their wheels squeal against ice-coated rails. Their lanterns swing in the wind. Bags of letters lie stacked in dark compartments, thousands of them, waiting for destinations that may no longer exist. Some reach their destination, most do not. Many are lost in ruined depots, burned in shell fire, abandoned in the snow. When the spring thaws, villagers find bundles of letters drifting in ditches, ink smeared by melted frost. They pick them up, reading strangers' confessions, strangers' fears, strangers' last words. They bury them carefully, as if burying the men who wrote them. In the trenches, men cling to the letters they already have. Some carry notes so worn the paper feels like cloth. Some reopen the same envelope dozens of times, rereading until the words blur. Some kiss the pages softly before tucking them back into their coats. One soldier keeps a letter from his wife that ends with, "Come home before the garden blooms." He reads it every night. He does not remember what blooming looks like anymore. Another carries a drawing from his daughter's stick figures beneath a sun made of yellow crayon. He touches it whenever the shells fall too close. It is his amulet, his armor, his reminder that life exists beyond this frozen world. Some men write letters they know will never be sent. They write for the dead. They write for the dying. They write for themselves. One German soldier writes to his brother, asking him to look after their mother. He folds the letter carefully. He tucks it into the breast pocket of his own uniform, knowing the Soviets will find it on his body one day. A Soviet infantryman writes to his fiancée, telling her that he dreams of the house they will build together. The house with blue shutters. The house with a small stove. The house that will never exist. The frost does not care for their dreams. One night, a blizzard sweeps across the line. Soldiers huddle together beneath torn blankets, their letters clutched close as the wind tears through the trees with a howl like grief itself. The fires sputter, the candles die, darkness swallows the world. In the morning, some men rise, some do not. Their letters are found tucked against their hearts, still warm from their final breath. A courier gathers the papers gently, as if lifting newborns. He places them in a pouch. He seals it. He carries them through mud, snow, and gunfire. Most of those letters will never arrive, but the act of writing them, the act of believing someone might read them, keeps a small, stubborn flame alive inside the men who fight through this endless winter. A flame warmer than any fire, a flame stronger than any cold, a flame that says, "I lived, I remembered, I loved," even if the world froze around them. Even if their words never left the front, even if the letters themselves became nothing more than frozen paper on a frozen road in a frozen war. The thaw comes without warning. Not with birdsong or sunlight, those have long forgotten this place, but with the sound of dripping. Slow, steady, relentless. Drops falling from shattered roof beams. Drops sliding down the blackened bark of shelled trees. Drops pooling in craters where snow once lay like a shroud. The eastern front wakes to water. Brown, murky, bitter water. Water that smells of rust and long-buried things. The soldiers rise with stiff limbs, confused by the sound at first. After so many months of crunching frost and howling wind, the gentle drip seems foreign, almost dangerous. They step from their dugouts into a world that looks familiar only in shape, its colours all wrong, its scents unsettling. The white has melted, but nothing beneath it is alive. What emerges is not spring. It is something raw, something ancient, something bruised. The earth, finally exposed after its long burial, reveals wounds that run deeper than any trench. Mud, churned by 1,000 boots, now bubbles with thawing rot. The ground heaves in places, as if exhaling after months of suffocation. Frozen corpses loosen from the soil. Helmets tilt. Fingers emerge from the thinning ice like pale roots seeking sun. The thaw does not bring life, it brings truth. And the truth is ugly. The forests drip like wet caves. Branches, once gilded with snow, now sag beneath the weight of water and ash. The trees look sick-leaning, cracked, their trunks carved by shrapnel scars that ooze dark sap. The wind, warm for the first time in a year, carries with it the thick odour of decay. It clings to clothing. It creeps into hair and gloves. It settles in the throat and refuses to leave. Soldiers move more slowly now, not from cold, but from dread. The mud sucks at their boots with greedy lips, pulling them downward, forcing every step to become a struggle. Rifles clog with wet dirt. Wagons sink axle deep into brown slurry. Horses falter and collapse, their ribs heaving, their eyes rolling with exhaustion. The thaw shows no mercy, neither do the rivers. The ice that once held armies in place splinters violently. Whole sheets break away with echoing cracks, drifting like silent rafts carrying branches, debris, and sometimes bodies still in uniform, still clutching weapons, still staring upward with the calm that only death understands. The currents carry them downstream, spinning them gently, almost tenderly, as if returning them to the world that war stole from them. Villagers re-emerge from their cellars, blinking into the damp daylight. They step cautiously across wet earth, their shoes sinking into the slush. They look upon what winter has unveiled: shell casings, broken bayonets, human remains half swallowed by mud, and they begin the slow, painful work of clearing. Some gather bones into baskets, some pile debris into pyres, some kneel in the mud, pressing hands to faces they once recognized. In the hills, Soviet forces press forward with renewed momentum. Their boots splash through the wet ground as they drive the enemy further west. They move through battlefields churned into swamps, past trenches that resemble mass graves, past forests where wolves and crows pick at the thaw's offerings. The men grimace against the stench but push on, driven by duty, by vengeance, by the simple knowledge that movement means survival. German soldiers, weakened and hollowed by winter, attempt to retreat through terrain that betrays them. Their vehicles bog down, their artillery sinks, their wounded drown in roadside ditches filling with freezing melt. Morale disintegrates beneath the weight of soaked uniforms, failing boots, and the rising awareness that the land itself opposes them. The thaw becomes a slow-motion disaster, not swift like a shell, not sharp like frostbite, but wide, swallowing, inescapable. Everything softens, everything smells, everything bleeds back into sight. One evening, as the sun dips red behind flooded fields, a Soviet soldier stops on a ridge overlooking a once beautiful valley. What was farmland is now a swamp. What was a village is now a smear of foundations and twisted beams. What was a forest is now a collection of drowned stumps rising from black water. He whispers, "The land is crying." But the land is not crying. It is emptying itself of bodies, of bullets, of secrets. War is being washed out of the soil, piece by piece. Not forgiven, not forgotten, just exposed. The men who survive this thaw will remember it longer than any battle. They will remember the mud, the smell, the sound of ice breaking like bones. They will remember how the earth itself seemed to rise up and show them everything they wished they'd never seen. Winter claimed the living. The thaw reveals the dead. And as the last snow dissolves into the wet, ruined ground, the Eastern Front changes shape again, not through strategy, not through gunfire, but through the quiet, merciless honesty of a land, learning how to breathe after too much death.